Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Olivia knew she was gonna die here. When? It was only a matter of time, but judging by the coughing that shook her frail, weakened body and the tingling in her sternum at her heart, her time would come soon. With unruly fingers, the old woman grasped the edge of the shabby blanket and pulled it higher. It was a futile effort. She couldn't get warm anyway. There were too many gaps in the walls. The January blizzard raged outside the barracks. Olivia opened her eyes, and the darkness beneath her eyelids was replaced by an almost equally all-encompassing darkness indoors. Something rustled in the distance and close at the same time. Before, when this barracks had been a residential and even a welcome home for working people on one of the city's outlying streets, mice would have rustled like that, as if someone were breaking down a damaged harpsichord. But there were no mice here now, because there was simply nothing for them to eat. And it was the old house itself that made the noise, the wooden rafters, walls, and ceilings that seemed to be suffering from the cold winter, from the fact that no one was taking care of them, that no one needed them anymore. The old bed was hard, and the pain in her back seemed to keep her awake, even if merciful sleep came to Olivia. But there was no strength to turn over. The old woman could no longer remember how long she'd been here. 3 days? A week? When it was still day, she got up, drank a little water, and ate the rest of the cookies. One was in a red paper wrapper labeled strawberry. Then she lay down. I thought she would lie down for a while and go to her, so to speak, work. But I overslept, old girl. Olivia gently sucked in air as she didn't swallow it greedily. She could delay a new coughing fit. But much more than the cold and hunger, she was tormented by her memories. Why doesn't a human being, such a strong creature, the pinnacle of evolution, have the ability to turn off memory at will, to razz, and like a switch turned, and no more tormenting, no more twisting of the soul what was gone forever, no more questions about whether you could have changed anything, prevented it? Memories came, bright, tenacious, juicy, merciless. Mom, am I really going to be happy? That day, her only child, her daughter Maria, was getting married. Olivia looked at the statuesque beauty and could not believe that this day had come, that her Maria today will become a wife. She will begin her own special, quiet adult life. Really? Olivia smiled hastily, furtively brushed away her tears and began to correct the veil that covered the bride's head and shoulders with a puffy cloud. Maria was a late child. Olivia had become a mother at 41. The doctors had been ruthless. They had assured her that such an old pregnancy would be problematic, but the woman had felt as good as ever for 9 months. It seemed to her that thanks to this baby, she had the strength to live on, to meet each day with hope for the best. And after all, it was not easy. With her husband, Hillary, they lived soul to soul for more than 20 years. They were like barely fledged chicks, hurriedly left their parents' nests and rushed into the big life, as if someone promised them that everything would be great. Even their friends didn't believe that it would last, saying that it was just not love forever, but the craziness of young student life, which, however, already crossed all boundaries, because Maria and Hillary behaved like crazy a little bit, to couples on a hand-in-hand, literally walked in everywhere together. Soon they were nicknamed inseparable parrots. But the lovers did not take offense, and in general, they were not interested in anyone and anything but each other. Then they finished studying. He decided to become a designer and create cars. She decided to be a teacher of French. They, by the way, were unlike each other in many ways. Maria loved fruits and greens, dancing was a lark, and also an exceptionally non-conflicted person. And even if you had to ask in the store to add or subtract, say, cheese, it was given to her with difficulty, and more often she obediently bought what they gave. Hillary was an owl, recognized only meat, bread, and francons as food, hated to dance, because he considered himself awkward and was not averse to even fight for a strange company, if it seemed that they were fighting for a fair and just cause. They were opposites, and at the same time they complemented each other perfectly. The newly formed cell of society first lived in a dormitory, then in a service apartment, which was given to Hillary. Years passed. They were still as happy together, except that there were no children. Doctors were throwing up their hands and saying that, theoretically, both spouses do not have pathologies, but just, that's how cruel nature has disposed. There is such incompatibility in exceptional cases. If they had divorced, each of the couple would have been able to create a family where children would have been born, but they decided to stay together. And as if the universe had mercy on those whose love withstood such a test. When they had long ago stopped hoping, Olivia realized that she was pregnant. She did not know how to tell her husband about it and decided to postpone this news until the vacation. The couple were going to spend it in a southern vacation home, which was famous for its mineral waters. But life was overturned by misfortune. Hillary died, suddenly and ridiculously. Just from the roof fell a piece of stucco. When Olivia was informed about it, she only cried out and collapsed without feelings. She woke up in the hospital, bedridden. The doctor explained that she'd been like that for several days, and it was an involuntary measure because she'd fall into a strange, deep sleep, and then she'd wake up, but she'd start screaming and want to run. The doctor took Olivia's hand and looked into her eyes. "You have to do this, for the baby's sake. It depends on you." And then after a moment's hesitation, he added, "Your husband would want you both to be healthy and happy." Olivia left the hospital and went back to her apartment. She began to pack. "I should have gone south. She doesn't have a heart," hissed an old neighbor sitting on a bench in the company of similarly elderly friends when Olivia left the house with a suitcase in her hand and got into a cab. She had barely had time to bury her husband, and already she was on vacation. Oh, and did you see that? The flowered dress. But Olivia, even if she had heard it, wouldn't have cared. She just thought it was the right thing to do and that Hillary would approve of her vacation, and the fact that an unborn child could benefit from fresh sea air, sunshine, and fresh fruit. Relatives. Hillary's own parents and family, the young woman, by the way, did not disapprove. Maybe they thought something like that, but they kept silent, and they supported her before the birth and then when her daughter was born. It was decided to name her after a very distant relative who lived even in the days of serfdom. That Maria was an actress in the theater of a certain baron, who for love of her even divorced his. He'd said he owned his own business. No, not even that. He bragged about it, saying he doesn't work for his uncle, but makes a lot of money himself. Olivia, of course, was interested in the details. It was not enough for her to be shown on the phone blurry photos of supposedly owned cars in a house, which were supposedly in a neighboring region, because Steve had supposedly lived there some time ago. And then he introduced his bride and future mother-in-law to his family, and a lot of curious details came to light. Apparently, not everyone in this family was ready to support the legend of Steve, and Olivia learned that no house and car he has. No. The photo he downloaded from the internet. It also turned out that his business is the sale of biologically active supplements, which are very effective against many diseases. Many people were involved in this strange business, but in fact, as Olivia realized, the real profit was only those who stood at the top. Her mother had tried to warn her daughter about all of this. She said that it was all very strange, suspicious. Olivia said that she couldn't believe that this company Steve was working for even existed. There was a huge scandal, but Maria took her fiance's side. She forgave him the deception with the housing and the car, as well as the fact that he gave her earrings with fake diamonds. "I just wanted to impress you," Steve justified himself pathetically and even let out a tear. "A girl like you deserves the best. You could have chosen a millionaire sheik, but you chose me and I wanted to please you. But give me a chance and I'll really earn it all." Maria had had enough of this. She sternly and coldly told her mother not to even try to interfere with her happiness, otherwise she might not come to the wedding. Olivia was faced with a cruel choice and decided that she would keep a good relationship with her daughter in there. Maybe she is just a selfish woman who is afraid of losing a child and should also believe that Steve will improve in time. But Olivia also timidly hoped that just in time, Maria would see what a bad man he was and file for divorce. And she, as a good mother, would be there for it. But Olivia hardly noticed these oddities. All her thoughts, all her being, were absorbed in the new knowledge. The old woman wept when Mary, who was also overwhelmed with emotion, told her husband that she was expecting a child. He embraced his wife, patted her eyes, and then went to sleep. And went day after day. Time flew. Unlike her own, her daughter's pregnancy was hard. But doctors only waved their hands and said that apparently something in the body is wrong, but they cannot understand what it is. At the due date, the baby was born. It was a sturdy boy, and they decided to name him Tony, in honor of his great-great-grandfather. Olivia barely remembered the man. She'd seen him only a few times in the village in her early childhood, and his gray hair and beard didn't match his ceiling-high stature and mighty broad shoulders. Tony lived as a hermit in a forest hut. In the winter he hunted, and in the summer he went out to the people for a short time. That is, he visited his relatives, looked after their farming in the collective farms, and helped them with advice and deeds, because Tony's health for the rest of his life was as good as his appearance. A great giant, Olivia believed with all her heart that now everything would get better, but it didn't. Steve still somehow held on during his wife's pregnancy. But then, as if off the brakes, at home, he began to make scandals. Yes, the kind that rarely any quarrelsome woman is capable of. He could disappear for a week and then come back, dirty, in torn clothes, smelly, drunk. Olivia finally talked to her daughter about the fact that it was all wrong, but Maria only cried and repeated that Steve has a difficult period in life and probably depression on the background of the first in his life paternal experience. And that's why he wants it to be bad not only for him, but for everyone around him. The old lady was honest in her opinion, but there was nothing else she could do, because there was still the last drop of hope that one day and very soon the grief-stricken father would come to his senses. Olivia also thought that if he destroyed her daughter's marriage, it would be difficult for her, a divorced woman with a child in her arms, to find her happiness as a woman again. And Olivia also noticed that Maria had somehow changed since she had told her about her pregnancy. It was as if she had lost her inner light, the very light that could give a person the will to live, help him to be happy. And Olivia was afraid that this light would never come back, and she didn't understand why it had disappeared. Steve's family, meanwhile, had no interest in his child. They congratulated him on the phone, and that was it. In fact, as Olivia realized, Steve and his family had had a final falling out, and they disowned him. And she was ashamed to be so angry in her thoughts, but she could understand. And then, when Maria passed the annual medical examination as she was used to, she was diagnosed with a terrible diagnosis, oncology, and in the final stage. Olivia was knocked off her feet, looking for money for treatment. She even stopped paying attention to Steve. He didn't matter at all now. And then it was over very quickly. Maria was gone. Did not help expensive drugs, for the sake of which Olivia emptied the bank account, where she had been saving all her life for a rainy day. Powerless was a psychic, which she turned to at the very end. Olivia begged her daughter to gather strength, to defeat the disease for the sake of not leaving her son an orphan. But all was useless. Maria was buried exactly 3 days before little Tony was to be 1 year and 2 months. The loss of her daughter, who had not lived to the age of 27, was for Olivia that fatal blow, which seemed to be layered on top of the loss of her husband. Life force left her. She was weakening, almost literally melting with each passing day. 3 months after the funeral of her daughter, Olivia was in the hospital. The doctor suspected a stroke. Then she was discharged, but the consequences remained. Sharply worsened mobility, back pain, spiking blood pressure. It was there, in the hospital, Olivia once came to Olivia's son-in-law. He brought some papers and said that they need to be signed urgently. Allegedly, it was somehow related to the inheritance, getting that share in the apartment, which belonged to Maria, because she, Olivia, in the early noughties rewrote half of it to her daughter, gave it as a gift. Olivia was crushed by grief. She was very lonely and scared. She signed everything. "What's this?" the old woman asked confusedly when she came back from the hospital and saw a bag in the hallway, in which her things were carelessly stacked. "Her things. I'm going to live in the apartment now, and I don't need an old woman in the subdivision," Steve said. Olivia felt like the room had run out of air. Her head buzzed and rumbled, and she swayed. "Where are you hatching, old girl? You signed it all yourself." The son-in-law smirked. "So, it was about the inheritance. You said it was for the notary," said the old woman. "Well, it turns out so." The son-in-law got serious. "It's like a gift to me for the apartment was. And the other half of it, it means that I, as a husband from the deceased, will pass. I'm gonna sell it. What? Olivia was in a bad way, leaning against the jamb, blinking and squinting, but her eyes were still blurry. We couldn't get along. Steve spread his hands and pretended to be sorry, but it came out as a horrible grin. That means you'll go to a new apartment, Grandma? Your things are here, as you can see. I'm not a thief. I don't want anyone else's stuff. Come on, let's go. Where to? I don't want to. Who's asking you? Are you deaf? This apartment is mine now. By law. It's fair. I gave it to you. But I'm not. Yeah, you're so smart. So, listen, old woman. He grabbed her by the shoulders so that her joints ached and shook Olivia. Nobody's gonna listen to you. Is that your signature? It's yours. It's legal. And if you say anything, I'll have you committed to the loony bin, you understand? The truth that she was no longer the mistress of her own house fell on Olivia hard, as if the cold, wet earth had crushed her, and she couldn't move her arms or shout for help. The only strength she had was to hold on to this reality somehow, and the fact that there was a baby sleeping in the far room gave her strength. Olivia was struck by lightning. Her eyes cleared, and she pressed her hands against Steve's chest, trying to move him aside. And my grandson, how could he be without me? Steve, don't push me. I'll babysit him. How can he be alone? How can he be alone without me, huh? He'll be all right, said his son-in-law, his expression as if he'd forgotten his own son's existence for a while. No, I don't need you here. Don't cry, grandmother. I'll find some girl. He wrinkled his face again in the semblance of a smile. To watch him. I'm a handsome groom now. There, what a house. And he shook the old woman again. If you go around here, whining to the neighbors, I'll get rid of the boy in no time. Oh, Steve, he's your son. Who knows, the man said. Do you think your Maria was quiet? Ha, she did things like that. No. You have a heart. Maybe I'll throw it in the garbage, shrugged his son-in-law. But if you, Grandma, shut up and get out of the way, then maybe I won't touch him. Well, are you going to the new apartment? There was silence between them for a few minutes. Olivia lowered her head obediently. I'll go, but can I? Let me see my grandson, just once. No. He opened the door and forced her onto the landing. You'll start a howl, I know you. Soon Olivia was in the car at the driveway, her things stuffed in the trunk. Good afternoon. Steve was greeted by a neighbor who came up the driveway at the same time. Where are you going? I'm taking my grandmother to a sanatorium, answered Steve. She needs a change of scenery after the funeral. That's right, shook his head neighbor. A change of scenery is useful after life's upheavals. Have a good rest, Olivia. Keep strong. And he waved his hand, sincerely wishing her all the best. The car drove for a long time through the city. It seemed like an eternity to Olivia. Finally, it stopped. High-rises and even 5-story buildings were far behind a pile of some industrial enterprises, frowning giants hidden behind fences and gates. Olivia got out of the car and twisted her head in confusion. Where had he taken her? There were, without exaggeration, barracks all around, and such barracks that they should have been torn down a long time ago. In some places, there was light in the windows, but most of them were boarded up, covered with plywood or even just plastic bags. I got a house here, Steve explained, getting out of the car. Let's go, Grandma, for the housewarming party. Olivia gulped for air like a beach fish and felt just as helpless. Creak, creak, creak. They entered the damp-smelling entryway, and the son-in-law jingled his keys, unlocking the shaggy sodden door. A lone light bulb flickered on under the ceiling, illuminating the squalid dwelling, a tiny corridor, and a darkened room that could be seen through the open door ahead. Olivia listened to Steve as if through a drowsy dream when she was still floating in it, but already aware of what was going on in the world around her. He said that here was a room, a living room, a cubbyhole with a kitchen, a bathroom. You owe for the light, by the way, he said. You got to pay, old girl, or they'll cut off the electricity. The refrigerator doesn't work, by the way. The water leaks? Well, you old people don't need much, do you? You'll organize everything here somehow. You've seen the world revolution. He chuckled at his joke. So you must be used to this kind of life. Enough, you've had enough. Now, as they say, let the young go. Olivia realized only now that her son-in-law had taken something to amuse himself, and he was swaying. She realized that her son-in-law had obviously taken something to cheer him up. He was even swaying. Steve stepped out for a moment and returned, dragging all of Olivia's luggage. He dropped it all on the floor. Something jingled in the depths of the stuffed bag. She realized her son-in-law hadn't packed her things with love. He just raked up what was in her closet, but of course, he kept what he could still sell for a profit. Kind of like he was taking care of his own personal gain. Olivia sighed and rubbed her wet eyes with her fingers, wiping them. She just couldn't understand. Why didn't he just throw her out on the street? Why does he pretend to care? That's not caring, no. Throwing out here. Does he have a shred of conscience and he muffles it like this? Or does he want to cover himself in front of people that he's not quite a murderer? He's not throwing his mother-in-law into the garbage. He's just taking her to another place of residence. That's it, old girl, live. Steve was already standing in the corridor, by the door. And watch me, he lowered his voice. If you're a fool, if you run to me or complain to anyone, I'll teach you a lesson. I'll teach you a lesson you'll regret. Do you understand? Yeah. Olivia's heart raced, cold sweat broke out. She had never been a thief before. She threw the sausage on the cash register and hurried away. There are so many beggars, she said angrily. Olivia shoved her hands in her pockets to keep warm. I'd lost my mittens somewhere. I couldn't find them. And then she pulled her right hand out of her pocket. There was a 50-ruble bill in it. There was still a little bit left after the payment for electricity. I just put the money in the wrong pocket, where I usually used to carry it. Here, I showed the same cashier the money. I'll pay. The painted girl hummed, pressed her lips together, but said nothing and punched in her purchases. A loaf of bread and processed cheese. Back in the barracks, Olivia took a drink of tap water and drank her lunch. She could hardly resist eating it all, so she let some cheese for dinner and a thick slice of bread for breakfast. And then the next day, Olivia called her son-in-law. The card. She knew he was smirking on the other end. No, I didn't lose it. But you're old. You could lose it. I have it. It's in my custody. Think about it. What do you need that much for? You have a grandson. No? Don't be afraid. When the pension comes, I'll take it off. Think of it as alimony from you for your grandson. But Olivia didn't know how to react to what was happening. Olivia sighed. So now, at least she would have hot tea. The next day, she went to the store again. Again, she stood up and held out her hand. It was shameful to admit it, but now the act of begging was easier. A couple of times, Olivia went inside and pretended to choose items from the shelves to warm herself up a little before returning to her work, as she mentally called it. By evening, it was clear that she had enough for such luxuries as a packet of tea and a bag of franca. But no matter how brave the old woman was, and very soon the meager ration made itself felt. The body settled in lightness, some airiness, but in the morning to get out of bed was getting harder and harder. And then there was a disaster. The house turned off the heating. How can we live now? Grandma Maria turned to the workers who were digging up the frozen ground not far from the barracks. Warm yourselves with clothes, turn on the heaters, answered the boy and stomped his feet. He was already freezing, and the work, which promised to drag on due to the old age of local constructions, was just beginning. I honestly don't know when we'll finish. Maybe tomorrow, or maybe a week from now. Olivia sighed and went back to her usual place, the store. But no sooner had she gotten up than that salesgirl looked out. This isn't a bum shop. Get out. Get out. She raised her voice to a shout. I'm going to call the cops on you. What am I doing? Olivia shook her head, her shoulders shaking. Go away. The guard stood behind the girl's shoulders. Or I'll put you in a snowdrift with your head down, and you'll sit there until spring. This guy looked just like his brother-in-law, and he even had the same ugly grin. Olivia walked and shuffled away. The snowfall was getting heavier. It seemed like a white shroud of snow, howling and whirling. Grandmother didn't understand where she had turned. It seemed that her house was over there. Home. Is this the place? This must be the last shelter. Olivia stopped and turned her nose. The overwhelming smell of muffins and coffee hit her. She walked toward the bakery, which stood alone where the courtyards of the 5-story buildings began. Lamps in old-fashioned green lampshades burned welcomingly outside the windows. There were even a few tables inside, and some of them were occupied by people. They were eating and drinking, warm and smiling. They were well nourished, cozy, safe. The old woman swallowed her saliva. I wish I could eat a cake and drink sweet tea too. Only, today she couldn't ask for a penny of alms. And from yesterday, literally 1 ruble was in her pocket. For that, Olivia thought they wouldn't even let her have a crumb. Gathering the rest of her strength, both physical and mental, Olivia was about to go further, somewhere, but suddenly her foot slipped. Losing her balance, the old woman fell. But she was lucky. There was a snowball at the bottom, and as Olivia determined by her first sensations, she didn't break anything. But she had no strength to get up. The feet of passers-by passed by, indifferent to other people's grief. "Help!" Olivia whispered weakly, and suddenly she was pulled up, gently lifted. The old woman gasped, blinked. The setting sun was shining from the back of the man who had come to help her, and it was hard to make out his face. "Are you all right? Does anything hurt?" the stranger asked. He was much taller than Grandma. She blinked some more. There was a cloud in the sun, curly and gray-white, the kind of cloud that promised there would be more snowfall and cold. Oh, how much more! And as the light shone less brightly, Olivia could see her savior. He was a young man, his eyes black, his hair as long as a raven's wing. He was wearing black jeans, a black sheepskin coat, in fact, black everything. Olivia noticed it, but she didn't have an opinion about it. She didn't care, and what did it matter if the man was nice and helpful? Confused, she answered that she was in one piece. "Did you come this way?" He pointed to the bakery. "The steps are slippery. Let me help you up." "No," Olivia shook her head. Then her lips trembled, and she mumbled through her tears that no, she shouldn't go there, she couldn't buy anything. Grandmother Maria was not accustomed to complain about her life, but now it was as if she had burst into tears. She was talking about the fact that she had been chased away from the place where she had asked. And was that a crime? "I'm sorry," she sobbed, finally gathering her strength. "Thank you for lifting me up." And she was about to leave. "Grandmother, let's go," suddenly said the stranger and resolutely dragged her into the bakery. "What? Why?" But, he said he just wanted to give her a treat. Why? Well, he just wanted to do it. As a gift. Just like that. Olivia was timid. But then, as they stood at the display case, she asked for a cake and cookies and tea. The stranger got himself a coffee and they just sat at a table. He didn't bother with conversation. He was looking out the window. Olivia, chewing diligently and sipping greedily from her cup, looked at him. Who was he? Dressed decently and even, if she understood anything else in this world, expensively. His hands aren't workman's. They seem soft and his nails are neat. On one of his fingers is a large silver ring with a red stone. Finally, Olivia got up from the table. So did he. She wanted to thank him again, but before she could say a word, he returned to the counter. 2 large meat pies, 5 lingonberry buns, 3 loaves of bread, 5 cottons, a packet of coffee. Olivia looked at him, then at the bag of food in her hands. "No offense, Grandma, but I just think you'll need it." He smiled and took her hand and led her out of the bakery. The saleswoman behind the counter rounded her eyes. Such a spectacular man and such a thing. Not only did he bring some vagrant from the street, although maybe she was a relative, he bought her all sorts of things. It would have been better. The girl shook her head. It would have been better if he had asked her for her phone number. "Thank you. Oh, my dear, thank you. I don't know how to thank." Olivia was overwhelmed with feelings. A complete stranger, and such a thing. He bought her so much. She clung tightly to his hand as if without it she would have fallen again. "You're welcome, Grandmother." He smiled at her. "You have to do a good deed once in a while, don't you?" That's right. He nodded. "Well, good luck to you, Grandma. May everything go well for you." Delicately removing her hand from his arm, he walked away. He was glad that he had met this old woman and done a good deed. It was his long tradition to do some good deed before. He was a bit superstitious and believed that a good deed in the universe balanced what he had to do now. And there was much to be done, and perhaps, if circumstances demanded it, His task would bring much pain and suffering to one man, but heaven knows the wretch deserves it. 2 weeks have passed since the stranger in black helped her. His generous gift of baked goods had helped the old woman feel full for 3 days, but then it had gotten worse again. On top of that, Olivia had a cold. Sometimes she tried to call her son-in-law, who answered the phone once. He listened to the old woman's pleas, said that he would come by the other day, and he didn't. Olivia was getting worse. She thought maybe she should at least go to her ex-neighbors, maybe call them and ask for help. But then she remembered Steve's terrible threats, and the old woman realized that she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for her grandson. If only nothing bad had happened to him. And suddenly her son-in-law called. In a cheerful voice, said that the house now has a mistress and the boy, stepmother. He handed the phone to someone and Olivia recognized who it was by his voice. Then to be sure she clarified and even calmed down a little. It turned out to be the neighbor from the first floor, Veronica. Veronica was a divorced woman in her 30s who claimed that someone had put a celibacy ring on her. Veronica lived with her more fortunate married sister and had in the house of a close relative of the role of a kind of babysitter for her 5 children. So theoretically, Veronica had experience in dealing with babies. "How are you, Olivia?" Veronica asked. "Steve said you're at the sanitarium. How are you? Do you miss home?" Olivia could barely speak. She looked around the room. The workers had fixed the heating main, but then it broke again. And for the 4th day, the barracks was cold, and it looked as if the frost would soon cover everything inside with frost. Grandma Maria was not used to lying, but she couldn't tell the truth either, because she was a little afraid for herself. "Yes, I miss you, but I don't know when I'll be back." "Ah." Veronica stretched, and it seemed that she was even glad. "Steve said that you wanted to visit your relatives. Well, don't worry about a thing. Tony is a very good boy, just a perfect child." And the neighbor told how he eats, plays, babbles. Tears rolled from the old woman's eyes. When the conversation ended, she suddenly felt so good. She went to the kitchen and heated boiling water, drank it with cookies from the package of strawberry. She climbed under a pile of blankets. She had found all sorts of old ones in the storeroom of the same apartment and tried to sleep. It was impossible to get warm, but at least in a dream the cold didn't bother her so much. And if she was lucky, Olivia hoped that maybe she'd dream about her daughter. And if she was lucky, Hillary. "Oh, you?" And the father. Veronica was not a woman shy and large, so with men with whom she came together from time to time, in the hope of arranging her female happiness, she used to talk frankly and sometimes even spiced her speech with a strong word. "Why are you hatching?" "No, for the fact that the old lady sent to the sanatorium, thank you, as they call it. I know you men. If something goes wrong, it's your mother-in-law's fault, but you take care of her. But what did you turn the apartment into without her, huh? And if I wasn't here, it would be a pigsty, wouldn't it?" Steve didn't answer. He pretended to be absorbed in the soccer match on the screen. "Oh, you've taken my soul out," Veronica said. And then she was distracted by a phone call. It was her sister. It turned out that she had a night shift. Her husband was down with the flu, and the eldest daughter decided to spend the night at a friend's house. So it turned out that the remaining 4 children aged from 3 to 12 years old have no one to look after them. Theoretically, my sister could not go to the warehouse marketplace on the night shift, but they're paid at an increased rate. On the nose was the next payment on the loan. "I realized that you'd be lost without me." Veronica snorted and promised to be there in 5 minutes. The woman looked at Steve, who was watching the match like a meditator. She shook her head and decided to look in on little Tony. The little boy was awake, tossing and turning. Veronica touched his forehead. "Well, that's right, fever." It wasn't her baby, and Steve didn't even call her to marry him. So they met, and she started to live with him, but she hadn't moved out of her sister's house yet. But Veronica's heart squeezed as she imagined that the little boy would be left alone with his father, who, frankly speaking, had already forgotten even to feed him. Veronica began to come here the very next day after Grandma Maria had left for the sanatorium. She sincerely sympathized with the old woman's grief and did not want to get in her face. And in general, Veronica thought badly of herself for the fact that barely a man buried his wife. She came to him. But on the other hand, that's life. Veronica explained her position to her sister. I've known Steve for a long time, since he's been married to Maria. May she rest in peace. Married, so I'm not a slutty, immoral woman, but just in a hurry. I'm not judging you, replied the sister. It's just that people will talk. Let them talk. Veronica dismissed it. What's in it for me? Cold, hot? I am, already 38 years old. A big girl, I'm sorry. I'll live alone a little longer, and I'll turn into a grandma, so. And by the way, I'm very noble. She splashed her hands. I'll live with a man who's a single father. A stranger's child, not everyone will accept, but I will, no offense. Oh, Veronica, said her sister. Do as you please, but Steve's a bit shady. So what? Maria married him, all right. All right, enough about dead people at night. And Veronica spit over her left shoulder just in case. Steve, do you mind if I take Tony with me? Well, in my sister's apartment until morning, until dinner? Veronica turned to the man and explained to him the work family circumstances of the relative. It doesn't make any difference, replied Steve. At least she won't yell. I'm sick of it. And we just have a headache, or maybe a sore throat, or maybe a tummy. Yes, we? Well, nothing. Now you and I will get together. We'll go to visit, right? Soon Steve was alone. He heard the door slam, but he didn't go to close it. He was just lazy and decided that he would go later, but for now he should watch soccer. The phone beeped with an incoming message. Steve threw a lazy glance at it. What else is there? It had been sent by a man Steve had worked with not so long ago, selling miracle cures. And this man wrote what Steve already knew, that their office was exposed by some journalists, that they were threatened with litigation by deceived people who believed that the drug would cure anything, even cancer, or even grow a new hand for a disabled person. Steve had left before all this started. He had been squeezed out by other people who had come into this perishable business. He lazily flipped through a few messages, not understanding why he was being told all this again. But the last lines alerted him. Apparently, someone has been hit hard. The man wrote, I'm only warning you because I borrowed money from you and I couldn't pay you back. And I won't be able to, by the way. I'm sorry. Steve frowned. What could he be warned about? The fact that he would be charged something for selling useless pacifiers for tens of thousands of dollars. He did not care. Everything was clean. And the suckers, mostly old people, they themselves, in Steve's opinion, were guilty of falling for the advertising and did not read the instructions. But then Steve opened the next message and rounded his eyes. You sold this to Grandpa Frank, remember? They are looking for whoever did it. I'd advise you to get away, preferably overseas, and get plastic surgery to make sure they don't find you. That's it. Goodbye. And thanks for the money. You're not far from those suckers yourself. Steve cursed. And indeed, he was an idiot when he gave his last paycheck from the case under the promise of repayment of the debt with a crazy interest, which this man swore to repay, because, allegedly, he knew how to play with stocks. I fell for it myself. In fact, he was as stupid as the pensioners who hoped to cure all their ailments with miracle vitamins. But who was Grandpa Frank? Steve could not remember such a person. In general, he had no need to remember all the old people with whom he worked, but he felt uneasy. Steve shivered and suddenly thought about the other day when he saw a strange black car in front of his driveway. Then, remembering that he hadn't closed the door behind Veronica, he jumped up from the sofa and went into the corridor. The stadium roared as another goal was scored. Steve thought that the sound could be turned down, and he froze in the corridor, because now there was a stranger standing there, and the idea that it was a drunken neighbor mistook the door dropped at once. This man was young, tall, and nightmarishly strong in appearance. Clad in black, he literally radiated menace. Steve? He asked, but it seemed that the question was rhetorically mocking, because he knows exactly whose apartment he got into and who was in front of him. Buy alarm system Baloo and sleep easy. With Baloo, your home is protected from any threat. Shouted an advertisement on TV, and Steve thought that the protection of this particular apartment was at full zero. He left the door open himself. Made it easier for this guy, whoever he was, to accomplish his obviously sinister task. If you're not a complete idiot, you'll sit down, keep your hands where I can see them, and we'll talk, he said, and moved forward, moved silently, like a cat. Steve swallowed hard. Shall we go into the kitchen? said Steve. The stranger nodded. Steve took a step forward, another. This hallway was full of junk that Olivia wouldn't throw away. And among the things that stood out was a floor rack, like the kind that would be more appropriate in a clothing store or a theater dressing room. On it hung Maria's outer garments, which had not been cleaned up in time, as well as her grandmother's scribbled fur coat, which Steve had decided not to give to her, but to sell later. And when Steve found himself near this rack, he suddenly grabbed the bar with both hands, jerked it to the side, and pushed it so that the structure with the things collapsed on the stranger. He did not expect such a maneuver and trivially fell to the floor, buried by the closet. But Steve realized that it would not last long, so he jumped out of the apartment and, jumping over 2 steps, rushed downstairs. Taif! Yawp! He was blocked by Albert, an old librarian who lived with an old lady wife who was head of the house committee, and 4 dachshunds with a temper and an angry temper that would be good for 40 bull terriers. Steve hesitated as he tried to squeeze past Albert's pack without them biting his limbs. Finally, he jumped out of the driveway. Oh, it's freezing. They promised a frost of 30, but it felt like -100 on bare feet, in just sweatpants and a t-shirt. Steve was glad that he had accidentally left the bunch of keys, including the car keys, in his pocket. He left them because they had a keychain in the form of a funny green frog, which he always clutched in his hand while watching soccer and believed that it would support his favorite team with luck. Somehow he remembered that Maria jokingly called him crazy for this. Steve rushed to this car and, gritting his teeth, shaking his whole body, tried to start the engine. Where to now? He decided that he would have to try to call that guy and find out from him what was going on. But right now, he had to get somewhere safe. And Steve knew where that place was. Olivia woke up abruptly, not even realizing what had caused it. She was dreaming about something. I think it was her daughter. That's right. She dreamed of that distant day more than a year ago when, as it seemed, she had finally divorced her philandering husband. They had fought often then. Steve hadn't even spent the night at home. Olivia tried not to meddle in the soul of the child, but in every possible way supported the nighty mood of her daughter when she decided suddenly that she would not run and look for him in the acquaintances, and instead will go to the holiday, called a friend. Maria had few friends at all, and this Angelica, a girl from the accounting department, a colleague, did not really like Olivia because she was some kind of broken, frivolous at 35, not married, because she was looking for someone special, a prince, waiting. But that time Olivia was grateful to Angelica that she had invited her daughter to some holiday, a party from the company. It seemed to be a good sign. The old woman hoped that maybe at least under Angelique's influence her daughter would finally realize that Steve really wasn't worthy of her. Olivia lay with her eyes open to the darkness of the barracks. Now that the merciful shackles of deep sleep had fallen away, she was getting very cold again. But what drew her attention was a quiet sound coming from outside. It was the creaking of the door. It had been opened. Someone had entered the room. "Who's there?" Olivia asked so quietly that she couldn't hear her own voice. "Who's there?" She repeated the question, and fear pierced her body as much as the cold. "It's me," came a familiar voice. "Steve." The old woman was confused. "What are you?" "Don't make a fuss, old woman," he muttered. "I'm this for a little while. I have here." He didn't have time to finish because the door creaked again, and then Steve shrieked, and something heavy fell to the floor. The silence of the night exploded with the sounds of a fight, and apparently Steve was losing, and he was already wheezing. Olivia, herself neither alive nor dead with horror, scrambled around on her strange, cold bed under the heavy blankets, pulled one hand out from under them and reached for the light switch. It was next to the bed. Light flashed under the ceiling. Electricity, unlike heating, came to the barracks properly, and in fact, only thanks to the fact that she could always go to heat boiling water. The old woman was still holding on. The lighting caused a brief confusion among those who fought. And now Grandma Maria could see everything. Steve was lying on the floor, face down, both hands clasped behind his back, and a man was crouching over him like a huge black predator. As he raised his head, he glanced up at the old woman, and recognition flashed in his eyes. And she recognized him. It was the same stranger who had helped her up at the bakery and then treated her and bought her baked goods. The guy swore short and angry, judging by the intonation, but the words sounded unfamiliar, like a foreign word. Olivia rounded her eyes. It was French. It didn't make anything clearer, though. "Help!" Steve squirmed under his opponent. "Shut up," the black-haired man said, and rose easily in one unified movement. Steve was left lying on the floor, his hands firmly bound with a plastic tie. Somehow Olivia wasn't scared anymore, she just didn't know what was happening. And then, inadvertently, she had another bout of harsh coughing. The old woman was choking, and it seemed to her that her heart was going to fail. She did not immediately realize that the guy in black was near her, that he was leaning over her and saying something. Then she realized that he was asking her what was wrong. He touched her forehead and pulled his hand away, as if he had burned himself on her fever. "How long have you been here?" the strange man asked. Olivia nodded. He frowned. He looked around the room. He looked back at Steve. "You two know each other?" "My brother-in-law." The brunette gritted his teeth so that his cheekbones stood out more sharply and pulled his cell phone out of his jacket pocket. "Cameron, send a car. The old lady's not well." "No, it's not my fault, you idiot. It looks like she has a cold or maybe the flu. I don't know. Right now, she's not feeling well at all." Olivia blinked, continuing to squint at the overly bright light. Her recent savior, meanwhile, had ended the call and was calling again. There had been a change of plans. "No, I found him. It's just, there's something else I need to do." "No, no problem. I'll call you back." "Man, let go." Steve's voice came out. He was floundering on the floor and he managed to sit up. "Who the hell are you? What the hell are you doing?" "I'm..." "Shut up," the brunette said calmly. "I'm going to release you now, understand?" He lifted Steve to his feet and shook him. "I see," he nodded toward Olivia. "You're a very thoughtful son-in-law, and that's to be expected. But you're lucky. I'll set you free. But don't do anything stupid, okay? You've made a mess of things, and you're gonna have to answer for it. I'm just an enforcer. You'll be talking to someone else. Running is not an option. I'll find it." He stopped talking, closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled sharply, then opened his eyes and continued more calmly. "You're playing doctor, but you're lucky. It's in your best interest not to piss me off, okay?" Steve didn't understand, but he nodded just in case, all his contrived dishiness evaporating. He didn't understand anything, but he felt he was in big trouble. The brunette turned Steve's back to him. The folding knife clicked, and the ties were cut. "It's okay." The guy raised his hands conciliatorily and walked back to Olivia's bed. He didn't let Steve out of his sight either. "Grandma, what's your name?" "Olivia." "Nice to meet you. I'm Alexander. I called for help." "Don't worry, I'll get you some help." "An ambulance?" Olivia whispered, thinking belatedly that she probably should have done it herself earlier. "Even better," Alexander replied. The next events merged for Olivia into something mixed, unclear, and at the same time fragmented into many episodes, as if she was inside a huge, confused kaleidoscope. She realized that some people had put her on a stretcher and carried her out of the barracks, that it was suddenly warm, that she was being taken in a car. Then other people were bustling around. They were doctors. She felt softness, cleanliness of the bed where she was, and it was warm again. They were doing something with her. And then finally came sleep, deep, calm, as never before. When Olivia woke up, the sun was shining outside the window. It was one of those winter days when spring seems to come tomorrow. The old woman looked around at her surroundings. It was a hospital room, and at the same time it was very cozy. "Good morning." A young, pretty nurse entered the room. "How are you feeling, Olivia?" "The doctor will come soon and tell you everything in detail. But I can tell you something too, you'll be fine soon. My name is Alice. You need to eat now. What would you like for breakfast? Here is the menu." A large laminated sheet appeared in the nurse's hands. "Unfortunately, we didn't find your glasses among your things," she said embarrassedly. "If you allow me, I'll read what we have." I, Olivia said at a loss. Grandmother didn't understand a thing. What kind of a wonderful hospital was she in, where the room was only one bed? Everything was so beautiful, pictures on the walls, and the food was a la carte. The nurse managed to clarify the situation. She said that it was a private clinic, White Hyacinth, and that Olivia's stay there was fully paid for. By whom? Olivia asked, shocked, although she thought she already knew the answer. Mr. Barsav. Alexander Barsav took care of everything, Alice answered. What about breakfast, Olivia? Your doctor will scold me if you don't eat anything before his visit. It was strange and embarrassing to be in such a rich position, but Olivia realized that she was really hungry. Christopher came along with the way she was feeling better. The old lady listened to the nurse, read the menu, and said she would like to have porridge with wild berries, a protein omelet with chicken, and a cup of tea. Everything was served about 10 minutes later on a tray and in beautiful dishes. Alice asked Olivia if she was allergic to roses. She answered that she wasn't, and she was just shocked when the tray was filled with a small vase with a real pink candy rose. Olivia's doctor was an old-school man. He looked about 60, but he was sturdy and quick. He introduced himself as Cameron and said that it was necessary, of course, to undergo examinations, but the initial prognosis was the most favorable, and in a couple or 3 weeks of treatment, Olivia would be healthy. Toward evening, Alice looked in on Olivia and asked if she would accept a visitor. She said yes, and Alexander entered the room. How many questions Olivia's grandmother had about what had happened to her son-in-law, how he had ended up in her barracks, and why were they fighting? But she was even more concerned about the reasons for Alexander's extraordinary act of rescuing her again. After all, I'm a complete stranger to you. The old woman waved her hands. I just don't understand. Do you believe in fate? Alexander asked. I do. The day I met you, I considered it a good sign that I'd met someone I could help. And the second time, let's say it's a sign again, but in a different way. He looked at Olivia carefully. She even became a little uncomfortable. It seemed that this young man was looking into her very soul. Do you know what your son-in-law was doing? What kind of business he was in? Olivia nodded. He said he sold vitamins. Some foreign firm had invented a cure for all diseases. Only I thought, Olivia added carefully, that he was lying. He used to say it with a laugh for some reason, and rarely. He started drinking a lot. He told his wife, my Marie, and I was there. Then when he sobered up, he swore a lot, saying it was none of our business, that he's a man, a provider, and he decides everything himself. You were right not to believe him. There was nothing in these supposedly miracle drugs. You know, Alexander continued thoughtfully, they are sometimes called harmless pacifiers, but it's not true. Sometimes people start taking them and refuse the real treatment. The consequences can be the most deplorable. Did someone die? Olivia asked cautiously. A good man. Alexander looked at her carefully, as if reading the old woman's reaction, and then he told her how it was. Grandpa Frank lived in a small village on a picturesque coast. He was a sturdy old man. In his 77 years, he still continued to go to the forest, to hunt, and just, as he said, to rest his soul from the big world, which even reached the village. Grandpa Frank was considered by many to be a hermit, but it was not so at all. He was friends with a family that had long ago moved to the city, and from this family, a boy, Christopher, was often sent to him for the summer. In fact, Christopher's childhood was spent there, in the village, in the company of an old man, to whom he became very attached. Time passed, Christopher. This man became a successful businessman, a millionaire, but continued to maintain good, in fact, kinship relations with Frank, who replaced his own grandfathers. They passed away when Christopher was still a baby. Christopher offered Frank to move to the city. After all, his age was already respectable. But he refused and said that his nature and native land kept him and he would not go anywhere. And then the old man fell ill. Christopher arranged everything to take him for examination, and the doctors made a serious diagnosis. Christopher's pancreas was out of order. Naturally, they prescribed treatment. The old man fought back, saying that he didn't need any chemistry. He used herbs like in the old days. It took Christopher a lot of effort to change his mind. Grandpa Frank went back to the village and began to live as before and heal. But then disaster struck. A man came to the village. He began to go door to door and introduce himself to the locals, mostly pensioners, as a representative of a certain pharmaceutical company. He spoke a lot of clever words, shook papers in front of old people's faces, which allegedly told about successful laboratory studies and clinical trials, showed certificates. He assured that the miracle pills would cure all diseases and that it was a natural remedy based on forgotten recipes of medieval healers, enhanced by innovative scientific developments, that it worked directly on human genes, and said many other things. The pills cost a lot of money, $10,000 per pack, and the entire course needed 30 packs. But a discount was provided, and only allegedly, because the buyers, pensioners, they are entitled to benefits. Many, and mostly those who lived alone, agreed. They took out loans, they withdrew their savings, they gave the last of their money. Grandpa Frank gave in too, but he didn't just start taking those pacifiers. He stopped taking the medications prescribed by doctors and decided that thanks to the miracle remedy, he no longer needed to diet. The old man decided that he would not say anything to Christopher, whom he considered as a grandson, his own person. He wanted to please him, to show him off when he recovered. Look, this is how I was cured without your chemistry. But soon his condition deteriorated sharply. He started his disease, and he could not be saved. Christopher found out the details of who had pushed Frank to this decision and took matters into his own hands. He had enough power to organize with the help of his legal team to investigate these miracle drug dealers and bring them to light. Christopher would make sure they never hurt anyone again, but he was much more interested in one particular person. He wanted to find the person who had convinced Grandpa Frank to make that fateful decision. Steve was that man? Alexander's story shook Olivia to the core. She believed him. She now knew what Steve was really like, and grieved that she had not realized his evil, vicious essence before, that she had not understood and done nothing, that she had allowed her daughter to marry this monster and have a child by him. Yes, Alexander answered. Can I ask you something? Olivia felt that she was ready to hear any answer. Who are you? And what do you want to do? I'm Christopher's brother, a cousin. I represent his interests abroad, say. And now he's called me in to help him with this case. So that's where the accent comes from. Olivia shook her head. It seemed to me that you began to forget your native language. I'd gotten used to using it. I spent the last few years in France, and I taught French when I was young. Really? So that's where your charm comes from. I could tell you were a complicated person, he smiled, and Olivia smiled back. But then Alexander became serious again. Christopher wanted to punish whoever had done this to Frank. Punish, not in the way that was legally possible for that man. You know, I was hesitant to talk to you about this at first. And the doctor. Alexander paused for a moment. Your doctor wouldn't approve of it, because it's stressful. But I think you should know. Christopher left the nuances up to me, but basically, Steve should have his arms, legs, and spine broken. Silence hung in the chamber. Olivia looked at Alexander and tried to understand. What kind of man is he? Was he really capable of doing this? She knew he could be kind, generous, but it also seemed to her that in certain circumstances, he was capable of a lot. But now I have my doubts. I mean, he's your son-in-law. That wouldn't be a problem. Theoretically, given what he did to you. You didn't end up in the barracks by yourself, did you? But he is the father of your grandson, and therefore you have a blood bond. And that's what I regret more than anything, Olivia said honestly. And I'll be honest too, I know that Steve did a lot of bad things. But if something happens to him, my grandson, Tony will end up in an orphanage. I'm too old and sick to be trusted with custody of him. Olivia started to sit up on the bed. Alexander walked over to her and handed her the remote control. This button adjusts the position of the top of the bed. If you press it, it will rise smoothly. Olivia gently pressed the button, and indeed part of the bed rose, thus helping her to sit up. Could you hand me my bag, please? It was a small old purse in which Olivia kept the most necessary things: documents, some medicines, glasses, and some photo cards. Here, my grandson. She showed Alexander the photo. He is here in the arms of my daughter, Maria. Alexander looked at the photo very carefully. Your daughter was a real beauty. And what age is the boy? Olivia answered exactly. I understand that. Your brother is that he hates the one who did such a thing. But how can you? It's all so horrible. Olivia felt the tears start to flow from her eyes again. Tony. Who's my grandson with? She remembered something else important. Who did he stay with yesterday when you arrived? You left the baby alone. After all, you think worse of me than I am. Alexander replied jokingly, but there was not a shadow of mirth in his gaze. I entered the apartment after I learned that Vera, that is, your brother-in-law's roommate, had gone to her own apartment and taken the baby with her. She got a call from her sister and she came down to watch the kids while she was at work. And if it makes you feel any better, I wasn't going to do anything to Steve right there. Christopher wanted me to bring him to him so they could talk in person, and then I screwed up. Your son-in-law, for a while, let's say, threw me off balance and ran. I chased him, and you know the rest. Not everything, Olivia replied. What happened after How was I brought here? I accompanied you in my car, Alexander answered. Steve was with me. He was a little more savvy than I thought he would be. I explained to him briefly what was going on and told him that there was a chance of a relatively happy ending for him, but only if he didn't do anything stupid. He walked out of here on his own 2 feet. He's back home. He'll be there and he won't run. He doesn't want his situation any worse than it is now. And you, Olivia, he's the reason you're in the barracks, isn't he? I am. If it makes you feel better, you can tell me how it happened. I don't know. Olivia shook her head. It's just life. It's just that he deceived me. And the old woman told how Steve had taken her apartment and what had happened next. That man definitely deserves to be punished, Alexander said thoughtfully. And at the same time, he must not be touched. What should we do? I will definitely think about it. And as for your property, that of course can and should be corrected. But how? Olivia marveled. I've already signed everything. I'll take care of the problem and I'll let you know. Now I have to go, Alexander said, getting up. Get well, Olivia. Your grandson needs you. Olivia felt exhausted by this conversation. She used the remote control to return the bed to its previous position and decided to take a nap. Olivia, are you asleep? A nurse called her quietly as she entered the room. You have a visitor. I told him that in your condition, it's not good to have many visitors, but he insists. Who? Olivia had no idea who else might be here. Steve, he said, your son-in-law. All right, let him come in, she mumbled, not sure what he wanted from her. Steve knew exactly what he wanted. Even though the events of the previous evening had been a shock to him, he quickly realized that the man who had come for him for his past deeds was somehow special to the old woman. He'd taken her to a paid clinic. Steve had an idea how much it would cost. He had no idea what these two might have in common, but he knew what he had to do. When he got to the room, he immediately started talking about how remorseful he was for mistreating Olivia, about how he realized that they were family. He said that he hadn't done anything wrong. He had nothing to do with it, and he didn't understand why he was being attacked now. And then he suddenly realized that Olivia didn't believe a word he said. Go away, she said simply. It's unfortunate that my daughter married you. It hurts me. What do you want? For me to protect you in front of him? You're a coward, Steve. You always have been. You just used my daughter, our family. Do you have a heart? It's a good thing your son's too young to see what his daddy's like. Your daughter jumped on me. Who else wanted her? Walking around like a gray mouse, just as crazy as her mama. Steve raised his voice, and he wasn't just talking, he was drooling. Son, what son is he to me? She fattened him up, she was one. And he called his dead wife a filthy, filthy word. How can you say that to me? Olivia shrieked. Her hand fumbled on the wall. The nurse had said there was a button to call her somewhere, and the old woman wanted her son-in-law to leave. You really don't like it, do you? Steve grinned. I didn't have anything going on with your daughter at the time. I didn't. Do you understand, old girl? There's no way I can be the father of this kid. The timing doesn't add up. Maria was a whore. I guess she wanted to pick up someone better, but she couldn't. And yes, it was convenient for me to live like that, very convenient. 2 fools got caught, and they hummed their ears. You made me sick. Well, nothing. At least I got an apartment. Steve chuckled evilly. What do you think you're doing? Attracted by the noise on the threshold of the room appeared Alice. Shut up, guards, shouted the girl in the corridor, and in a minute she was joined by a sturdy type. Olivia, your visitor to escort to the exit? Alice asked, squinting unkindly. Yes, I want him to leave. Olivia answered quietly and cried. The guards, almost by the scruff of the neck, escorted her son-in-law to the exit of the clinic. Alice fussed around the patient and apologized for not preventing the scandal earlier. The old woman could only think about what Steve had said. Was he lying? Did he want to hit her hard? Or was it true? Because then, at that time, when Maria said that she was pregnant, they really did not get along with Steve, and a little more would be a divorce. But then who could be the father of the child? And why had Maria, her kind, pure, gentle girl, said anything? Olivia did not know that at the moment of the conversation in the corridor was and heard everything Alexander. He was a little late in the clinic to talk to the attending doctor of the grandmother. And then when he heard everything Steve had said, he left the clinic in a hurry. He had some things to clear up. Veronica basically wanted to have children someday, but she had always thought that the children would be hers, her own. And now she had to take care of Steve's son, as if her sister's brood wasn't enough. Good afternoon. Are you out for a walk? A tall man approached Veronica. She remembered his name. Alexander. He'd come here the other day to see Steve. What their business was, it wasn't clear at all. Steve only said that he knew him. His voice trembled strangely. We're taking a walk. Veronica smiled. We breathe fresh air. It's good for the baby. Naturally, Alexander sat down in front of the boy. Tony had recently learned to walk, but he did it very diligently. The little boy smiled happily and twirled his head. He was amused by the fluffy snowfall. Are you his fiancé? Alexander asked. Fiancé? Well, I'm not. No, we haven't talked about it yet. Veronica giggled coquettishly. Why does he hesitate? Such a kind woman, taking care of the son. Listening to these sweet speeches, Veronica was distracted. Hey, kid, your hat is off on your forehead. Alexander gently reached out to fix the hat. Let me help you. That's it. It's good again. He stood up, smiled at Veronica again. Have a good walk. Say hello to Steve for me. Tell him that things will be clearer for him soon. He knows what I'm talking about. Veronica gave Alexander a thoughtful look and sighed. She really liked this mysterious acquaintance of Steve's. And why didn't she get such a man? Handsome, it is obvious that strong, and also he has a car, obviously expensive. He's not accepting anyone. A secretary in the reception of one of the most famous businessmen of the city and region. Woke up and rushed in front of a tall, black-haired man whose face instantly caused associations with some predatory animal. I'm always allowed, said the stranger, who unceremoniously intended to open the door to the office of the head of the corporation. Bypassing the obligatory stage for all visitors, it was necessary to tell the secretary who he was, and she looked, whether it was appointed by appointment, clarified what the issue was, could ask the chief if he was free. But the girl protested. New girl? He interrupted. The secretary nodded. I like it. Before, only blondes sat here, and you're a redhead? It's refreshing. He winked and entered the office, leaving her confused and embarrassed. Oh, it's you. A man in his 40s in a business suit sitting at the desk glanced at the newcomer. How's our business going? There is news, said Alexander. But before we clear up one question, a party a little over a year ago on a yacht. Models, girls from the firm with which you signed that lucrative contract. It was fun, right? What are you talking about? Christopher frowned and even pushed back the folder with documents he was looking through earlier. Did you have a good time? Alexander continued. So good that you forgot about the consequences, right? And this girl here. Alexander handed his brother a smartphone with a photo. Do you remember her? Christopher frowned, looking at the picture. It had been taken at the party. He was with two girls, the senior accountant, Angelica, from the partner firm. It was a small firm, and such an alliance opened up some great prospects for her. Christopher remembered the other girl's name was Maria. Angelica introduced her as her friend, and then in a confidential whisper told him that Maria was offended by her husband and that she had taken her friend out to get away at last because she was a recluse. The party ended well past midnight. Christopher grimaced. He'd let himself go too far. He behaved like some uncouth boy. He had danced with this Maria and secluded himself with her in the cabin. It had been a flash, some kind of obsession between them. He remembered that when the heat of passion wore off, the girl burst into tears. She began to say that she was so bad She didn't know what had come over her and that she had cheated on her husband. He felt uncomfortable and tried to comfort her. He said it was nothing. They were adults and didn't have to tell her husband about it, especially if he was treating her so badly. Then Angelica picked Maria up and said she would take her home. She didn't seem to realize what had happened between them. Christopher twirled the pen nervously in his fingers. When Alex had arrived, they talked a little about everything, about life, and he'd mentioned this episode. He'd said that he usually had constant mistresses, and then suddenly she'd been bewitched. Why had he said that? No reason. My brother and I never kept secrets from each other. We shared everything, but now Christopher didn't understand what was going on. I'll explain it to you. Alexander understood his brother's confused look, but I have to start from afar. It all started when I started looking for that bastard who killed Frank. I came upon a man who was connected with all this and wanted to pay a personal visit to move on. I went to the suburbs for coffee and met this old lady. An old lady? What does that have to do with anything? Christopher almost jumped. Listen, brother. Listen carefully and don't interrupt, Alexander said, putting his palm on his relative's shoulder. Olivia had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, and that time seemed like a vacation to her. As soon as she felt better, she went out for walks, accompanied by Alice. She could walk in the small courtyard on the territory of the clinic, where fluffy blue spruces grew, or in the miniature but lush winter garden, where there was even a pond with red golden carp. His cough was gone. His heart was working better. Steve never showed up again, but Alexander came almost every day, and Grandma Maria was very happy about it. She was a little uncomfortable to use his kindness, but she did not refuse gifts. He gave her cozy, comfortable clothes to the hospital and then simply said that everything that was needed could be asked from Alice. She would order and he would pay for it later. Olivia asked to take one important thing from the barracks, a photo of her grandfather, Tony. That, too, was fulfilled. Olivia, Alice looked into the room. There are visitors here to see you. Alexander and Alice looked worried. They've just been to the head doctor's office, Anne. They were, and I told you that excessive stress is bad for the patient, but I see you can't stop, said the head doctor who entered the room. Olivia, I need to be present for this conversation. Olivia, what's wrong? The old woman was confused and then aghast because 3 more people appeared in the room. Alexander, who had a boy in his arms. Tony, the old woman stretched out her hands to her grandson, and Alexander gently put the child on the edge of the bed. He himself pushed the chair and sat closer, ensuring the baby so that he did not fall off. But how? What? The questions crowded into Olivia's chest, tears welling up in her eyes. How she missed her grandson. Hello, Olivia, Christopher said. He didn't look like a formidable, solid businessman now. He was, of course, wearing an expensive tailored suit, but he looked like a confused, worried man who was about to have a very difficult conversation. It was mostly Alexander who spoke. He spoke without hurry and interrupted several times when the chief physician intervened. He was very interested in whether the patient was feeling well. He came up to her and checked her pulse. Sometimes he grumbled that nerves should be taken care of at such an age after such an illness, and then they try treat, and then that's what happens. Alexander talked about everything. Olivia listened and could not believe it, and at the same time she realized it was true. Her daughter, her Maria, had spent a random night with a man. She was afraid to confide in her mother and even more so to hide it from her husband. Alexander emphasized that this was not just an assumption made because of a conversation he had overheard. It turned out that he had approached Veronica, who was walking with the baby, for a reason. He had managed to discreetly and carefully obtain a few hairs from Tony's head, and thus it was possible to conduct a genetic paternity test, which showed that Tony was Christopher's own son. But what does that make? Olivia whispered. So Steve is a stranger to you. He's a stranger to you. Alexander finished for her. He's not a relative. The baby has a real father. I'm not married, Christopher said, and I never have been. I don't have children. I'm sure of it. I don't have kids except Tony, and I want to be a real father to him. You want? Grandma hugged the boy tighter, hugging him. Will you take my grandson away from me? No, I won't give him to you. How can you do that? My little blood. I told you so. The head doctor squinted. Olivia, please calm down. You don't have to be afraid of anything. Christopher continued hurriedly. I have no intention of separating you. But the child, of course, must have all the appropriate conditions. You know what I mean. Olivia, I want to suggest something. You can live next door to me, together with your grandson. I have a big house and there's plenty of room for everyone. The boy needs to be with his real family, and that's me and you. Olivia cried. Although they were not tears of grief, the head doctor insisted that she had had enough visits for the day. Olivia fell asleep easily that night and had peaceful dreams because she knew that there was nothing between her and Steve now. More importantly, she knew that her Maria's son Tony was sleeping somewhere else tonight. It turned out that Alexander and Christopher had taken the boy as soon as the results of the genetic testing were known. Steve gave them the child without a peep. He was most afraid for himself and was ready to do anything if it could whiten him in the eyes of two powerful enemies. In general, the head doctor was against stress for patients very much. But Olivia said that she was ready to receive visitors even today on a new day. Alexander brought a lawyer who explained to the grandmother in clear language that it was possible to cancel her gift. The best specialist would take care of it. True, it was impossible to do anything about the fact that Steve received a share in the apartment after the death of his wife. Olivia rejoiced that she would soon be discharged from Christopher's house, and not just any house, but a mansion in the suburbs. Every day came photos and video messages about how Tony was doing. It turned out he was already surrounded by Nanny's two lovely women in light purple uniforms, playing with the boy, showing him the room he'd been assigned as a nursery, and finally, the day had come. Olivia had to go to the new place. She realized that now a whole new life would begin for her. But there was something else she wanted to understand first. So what's going to happen to Steve? She asked Alexander, who had come to pick her up. You know, he's nothing to me now. Olivia realized that Steve was a terrible person. He had done a lot of bad things. But at the same time, she even felt a little sorry for him. She realized that Alexander's threats were not empty words. She realized that people like Alexander and his brother were capable of many things. I wanted to talk about it, the man said. You know, as soon as I found Steve, I started collecting information about him. Do you know that he's sick? Yes, Olivia nodded. He said he had a lot of headaches. He said it was because of the women's scandals. That's how it is, Alexander laughed. For a long time, the doctors thought it was a blood pressure problem. But the day before yesterday, I got the information that Steve has brain cancer. Olivia gasped. An extremely aggressive form and stage. Anyway, there's no help for it. The doctors say he only has 3 or 4 months left. And when I broke the news to my brother, he doesn't believe in fate the way I do, but he said it's a just retribution. Olivia didn't know what to say. She knew that Alexander was right about something, and yet it was too scary. So you won't touch him? She asked only quietly. Alexander shook his head. No, my brother doesn't want me to get my hands dirty, and frankly, I have my own business to attend to. I didn't know Grandpa Frank, unfortunately. He was a good man, and he will be avenged, albeit by fate. I'm leaving tomorrow, Alexander added. How? Where? Olivia was confused. She did not doubt that Christopher was not a bad or even a good man, because that was what her brother said about him. But still, it was Alexander who had come to her aid that frosty day. It was thanks to her meeting with him that she survived, and it was thanks to him that her grandson found a real father. To Mexico, the young man replied. I've always wanted to go there. My brother and I are a little different. He likes business, but it's too boring for me. If he has difficulties, I'll help him, of course. I've done it many times, but I have my own way. Olivia sighed. How sad it is when people who suddenly appeared in your life, who brought light into it, who brought you back to something you never dreamed of, suddenly leave. One would have thought that Alexander would come to visit his brother and nephew someday. But Olivia realized it might not happen. He might just settle there forever. Who knows? And maybe he would come, but she was already very old. Grandma Maria thought about all this while the car was driving through the city. And that woman, the neighbor who lived with Steve, she asked. Vera? Alexander said. She left him. He was alone. And soon, Your apartment will belong to you. And Tony again. Olivia, don't be sad. He touched her shoulder gently and smiled. We're here. You're home. The car drove through the gate into the mansion grounds. Snow covered everything now, and the branches of the trees and shrubs were like silver in hoarfrost. But Olivia could imagine how beautiful it was here in spring, summer, and fall. She got out of the car, leaning on the hand offered to her. They walked to the house, went up to the wide porch. Two marble lions with curly manes sat on either side of it. He ate well, said the nanny about his ward. It's nice to meet you. My name is Katia. Tony is a very nice young man. He kept asking, where is Baba? I'm here, grandson, said the old woman and stroked the child's head. His hair was as blonde as his mother's. Christopher wants to talk to you some more, said Alexander quietly. He feels guilty for what happened, for treating your daughter like a one-night stand. That's life, Olivia sighed. I don't know how things would have turned out, but she loved Steve so much. She believed he was her destiny. She turned to the baby. Look, Tony, it's your uncle. Uncle, repeated the boy with a very focused look and reached out and touched Alexander's hand. He was interested in his ring. He grinned at him. Grow up soon. I'll give it to you, nephew, when you turn 16. They say it brings good luck.
John hadn't slept a wink all night. To be more precise, he was in a hurry to get to the nearest village on his huge truck. Next to him, Tom, his replacement, sniffles peacefully. Tom, wake up. We're in a crowded place. We need breakfast. Then you can drive, said John. Tom opened his eyes with difficulty and looked around leisurely. I suggest that we rest in this place at least until lunchtime. We need to regain our strength. After dinner, we'll move on, and then we'll take the open road at night, said Tom. The two companions did not argue with each other. They got out of the truck and went to a roadside cafe. The customers of this cafe are mostly truckers. As soon as they sat down at the table, a middle-aged woman with disheveled hair and a puffy face approached them. She seemed to have recently woken up and clearly hadn't had a good night's sleep. Hi, Leslie. How are you? John asked. Leslie was clearly not happy to have such an early visitor. How are you? I haven't given birth yet, but I'm not dead yet, she mumbled, and our water was turned off last night, but it's back on now. So any order you want will have to wait for an hour or so. Just don't rush me, Leslie said and tossed the shabby menu on the table. We're in no hurry, Leslie. We can even take a nap here. We'll eat what you make first. Leslie didn't mind and slowly made her way to the kitchen to start cooking for her regular customers. Leslie was a kind woman, but she was rude. She didn't like to be rushed, but she appreciates it when customers show her simple human understanding for her work in such difficult conditions. The cafe is located at a considerable distance from all the benefits of civilization. The fact that the right products are procured on time and fresh food is served is a huge challenge for the area. She decided to show her gratitude for the understanding with a concrete action. 5 minutes later, Leslie brought 2 large glasses of hot coffee from bags. John and Tom were lucky that she'd saved 2 croissants yesterday, which came in handy. Here, while you're soaking the worm with coffee and croissants, the hot one will be ready soon, said Leslie with a completely different, more friendly tone. Well, Leslie, you're not a woman, but a gift. If you only knew how convenient it all was, Tom was glad. While they were enjoying the hot coffee and stale croissants, they heard the ringing of the bell that hung over the front door of the cafe. Not many people in these parts this early in the day. Besides, John is looking at the surrounding area through the glass front of the building, and there is no other vehicle visible except for their truck. But right now, 2 mysterious ladies appeared in front of them. Despite the fierce wind, the ladies are dressed lightly. Both are wearing ultra-mini skirts that barely reach the bottom of their slender buttocks. The high stilettos look very spectacular, but it must not be very comfortable to walk in them in such unpaved terrain. Despite the harsh atmosphere, the ladies looked quite festive. No sooner had John gotten a glimpse of all this beauty, the 2 ladies headed straight for them. They did not wait for a special invitation and immediately sat down next to the guests. Hello, boys. What, we miss you? Asked the one who sat next to Tom. The ladies are acting very relaxed, as if they have known these men for a long time. Hi, of course we miss you. What's your name, cutie? Tom recognized the guest immediately and eagerly joined in the conversation. Elizabeth, and what's yours? The girl extended her hand, not taking her eyes off Tom's swollen face. And I'm Angela, introduced herself to the second girl, who sat next to John and still kept to herself. After a brief acquaintance, the conversation was going very well. "So how long are you going to chew your croissants? Or shall we go and do something more interesting?" Elizabeth went on the offensive. "Come on, John, don't you think it's a good idea? While Leslie cooks something for us, we'll go out with the girls, then we'll return to the meal as a team, eh?" Tom said, his eyes lit up at the near prospect of being in the arms of the beautiful Elizabeth. John felt tired, so he didn't really engage in the conversation. Angela was also acting a little distant. "Well, a date is a date. Girls, where's your nickel? Or are you working right in the arms of nature? There's a motel that just opened up 5 minutes from here. I said we go there. It's all set up for total relaxation," Elizabeth said. Then the four of them walked along the big highway to the nearest motel. The motel turned out to be a small old house on the side of the big highway. A middle-aged woman with a very brightly painted face greeted them in the yard. She did not ask any questions, but just silently led the guests around her establishment. However, the choice is small. Only 4 rooms with double beds in each of them, but all of them are free. John and Tom paid the amount of money and went to different rooms with their new friends for an hour. Entering their room, John wrinkled his nose at the unpleasant smell. Apparently, a lot of alcohol had been consumed and a lot of cigarettes smoked in here before them. An acrid odor permeated the entire interior. But John liked the fact that it was quite warm, unlike Leslie's cafe. John looked around, then took off his shoes and plopped into the double bed. His young friend Angela was clearly not feeling very enthusiastic about his company. But like an obedient slave, she began to remove her outer garments and folded them neatly on the edge of the couch. When she was left in her beautiful underwear, John looked at her and shuddered as if he had been electrocuted. He jumped off the bed and walked quickly over to her. Then he turned her torso toward the window and stared at her Angela's neck. His gaze caught her pendant. "What's wrong? Is something wrong?" Angela asked. At that moment, she wondered if she should call security right now or find out about the strange behavior of her client. She had a history of customers trying to take away her valuables. This pendant was gold. Angela was being cautious. "Where did you get that pendant?" John asked. "I bought it at the jewelry store. Where else could it be from?" answered Angela. "Are you sure you bought it at the jewelry store? You're asking strange questions." John took another look at the pendant. The chain was exactly the same. Even the pendant on the chain was a rhombus with an emerald inlay. John stepped away from the girl and sat down on the edge of the couch. He felt goosebumps running through his body. His breathing became labored, and now he felt a strong shiver in his body. "Are you okay?" Angela asked. John didn't bother to answer as he was now deep in his memories. Angela approached him from behind and began to lightly massage his back. "I think you look very tired. I'm going to help you relax now." John sharply jerked her hands away and said, "What's your real name?" "I'm telling you, Angela, you're kind of weird in general. You can tell me the truth. I've been cruising this highway for 20 years, and I see girls like you at least 3 times a month. I know Angela is your working name. I would like to know your real name." The girl sighed and reached on the couch for her dress. "Yes, that's right. You better get dressed," John said and looked away. Angela leisurely put on her short dress with shiny ruffles. Then she took a cigarette out of her purse, lit it, and sat down in a chair in the corner of the room. "So you filmed me just to talk? I don't mind. And it happens," she said. "Your pendant reminded me of something important. Exactly 9 years ago, I bought the exact same one to give my favorite and only daughter for her birthday. She picked it out herself. She wore it around her neck all the time. And when it came time to bury her, we decided to leave her favorite piece of jewelry around her neck as a memento from her parents." "How old was she when she was buried?" 19. If she were alive now, she'd be 24. Probably married by now, or introducing you to her boyfriend. You'd be nervous about finding her boyfriend's faults. Then you'd agree to marry her off. Then she would have made you happy with grandchildren, holiday visits, congratulations and gifts on every occasion. But none of that was meant to be. Is that why you're grieving now?" Angela said, trying to sound like an understanding person. "Yes, that too. What is the reason your daughter died at such a young age?" "She was murdered by the bastards. They killed my princess," said John bitterly. "Were they punished?" "I think so. 2 of them are in jail. One of them got away with it somehow. You don't have a daughter, and I don't have parents. You see how things work out in life. What about your parents? I don't remember my father. He died too young. I remember my mother well. I was 9 years old then. She was sick. There was no one around to help her fight for life. I was a child. I couldn't do anything. A few months passed. She gave in to the disease and quietly left this world. How long have you been on the highway? Seems like forever, but I don't count time. What's that supposed to mean? Time means something to look forward to, right? I don't expect anything to happen. I feel like I'll work here all my life, standing along the highway during the day and entertaining different men every night. If you've set your mind to it, that's the way it'll be. If you try for a different life, at least you'll know you tried. Even if you fail, your conscience will be clear, said John fervently. In all the time I've been working, do you know how many moralists like you I've listened to? If not hundreds, and certainly dozens. In fact, they're all lying. If they really thought what I do was obscene, they wouldn't come to us. And coming to us, doing your thing, and then acting like a moralist is just so much fun, Angela said. I do think it's indecent. Here you are sitting in front of me, and I don't even think about using your body. Yes, I used to be young, not without sin. But since my daughter died, my views have changed in a completely different direction. What can I say? Pull yourself together, try to live for today. Let your daughter rest in peace. You have to accept that truth, because you're a strong adult. If I was able to come to terms with my mother's death when I was 9 years old, you'll be able to, Angela said in a calm voice. You know what, why don't you quit all this mess and try to get your life back on track? I'm willing to help with that, said John. Don't make my shoes laugh. You all promised that, but where's the guarantee that you won't turn me into another pimp? Asked Angela. Don't just say no right away, but think very carefully. We'll be here before lunch. If you make a decision, everything will go smoothly. I'll take you away from here. No one will get you later, said John. Thank you, but I don't think your normal life has anything good in store for me. If I want to go there, I'll let you know first thing. My time is up, I'll go, said Angela. Then she picked up her things and left the room. John walked alone back to Leslie's cafe and waited for Tom. Judging by the sounds through the wall, Tom had had a good time. Now, of course, it would take him a while to pull himself together and get up. Tom came in cuddling with his Elizabeth when Leslie was already serving the hot pot. John, are you bored alone? Where's your fairy? Asked a cheerful Tom. I let her go. John answered briefly and did not explain the details in front of Elizabeth. Their conversation continued outside after Tom had said a fervent goodbye to his Elizabeth. I need to go to that motel again and meet Angela. I want to take her with me, John said. Twinkles, John, twinkles. Don't forget you're married. Why, she's hot, isn't she? Tom asked in a whisper. What do you want? If they see me now, they'll punish me later, she said in a whisper. If you're going to leave, come out. I'll get you out of here. Leave right now, or I'm calling security. These guys won't be nice to you, and they won't be nice to me either, Angela said in a whisper. No matter how much John tried to convince her, Angela wouldn't agree to leave here. When he realized that it was useless to convince her, he continued on his way with bitterness in his heart. They drove in silence for a long time. Tom realized that John was experiencing very difficult feelings, so he decided to give his friend a chance to speak. John, I was working in another country at the time, so I don't know the details. And then it was awkward to ask, because I didn't want to stir your heart. What really happened to your daughter? Tom asked. She was murdered. By who? How did it happen? Since we have a long drive, I'll tell you. John said and began his story. When I was young, I didn't want to start a family for a long time. I thought it was a burden. I dated all kinds of girls and enjoyed the free life. Then I met Emma, my wife. She was one of the girls I chose for temporary entertainment. But I soon discovered that she was seriously in love with me. That alarmed me. I tried to keep her away from me, but the more I tried, the closer she got to me. And then suddenly she announced that she was pregnant. This news upset me because I didn't see Emma as my spouse, and I still didn't intend to start a family in general. But I had to get married. Family life had become a real cage for me. I still had my heart set on having fun, and Emma's belly was getting bigger by the day. She tried to keep me busy and worked herself to the bone. I vaguely remember that she had several threats of miscarriage. She ran alone through the hospital and went to the hospital for preservation. Days like that felt like a breath of fresh air to me. I was always of the mindset that if she left me, I would let her go with a light heart and never bother her. How foolish I was then. As Emma's due date approached, I purposely took a long-haul flight because the prospect of becoming a father didn't make me happy. I knew that having a baby would make my cage even tighter. When I returned from the long haul, I was shown a small pink-colored package at home. My wife told me we had a daughter, and she was named Jeannie. Out of the pink wrapper, barely open little eyes and a wrinkled face looked up at me. I didn't want to hold her in my arms. As if my wife had anticipated this reaction, she took her daughter back and never offered to hold her again until I started reaching for her myself. But it was a long time later. Jenny cried at night. I wanted to sleep. It annoyed me how my wife would fall sound asleep and not hear the baby's cries. On days like that, I would make up any excuse not to spend the night at home. After a while, I found that Emma and I had become complete strangers, although our relationship had not been particularly warm before. I was in despair. Before the birth of the child, I still had hope to love this woman, but after the appearance of a daughter became unbearable in the family. One day, my wife came to me and asked me why I was so indifferent to my daughter. I didn't want to rake up the past and tell the truth. And what was the point? To get her off my back, I blurted out that if I had a kid, it would be different. But here is a girl, with her do not play, on soccer, she will not take with you, and a little older will leave in another family, as if all your care and was not at all. That was my greatest folly. Once on a voyage, I caught a cold and came home with a high fever. My wife was working at the time. She left me the baby and went to work herself. I was tossing between heaven and earth in the agony of high fever. I silently prayed to God not to torture me like this if He wanted to take my soul. At some point, I felt someone's touch on my face. It was my 3-year-old daughter. I thought she was playing dolls in her room, but she that day did not move a step away from me, but only stroked my face and looked sadly at my suffering. Since that day, my attitude towards her has changed, and my daughter was waiting for it. I come home from work. She runs to meet me. I lie on the couch. She brings me a pillow. She fixes my blanket. A little later, she started to cook for me with her little hands. I was amazed at how devotedly she took care of me. So after a while, we became friends with my daughter. But I was stupid enough to keep talking in front of her about how it would be better with a boy. I didn't realize how painful it could be for her. When my daughter got a little older, she started showing interest in serious sports. My wife signed her up for wrestling. Now I was proud of her, and I should have been wary instead. By the time my daughter was 10, my wife and I were regularly called to school. Her teachers were complaining about her daughter beating up high school kids. I became even more proud of her. I thought she was growing up to be a strong girl. Later, my son was born, and I think I began to spend less time with my daughter. And that hurt her. To get my attention, she tried to play sports even harder and do even better in school. As far as I remember, she was always walking around with injuries and bruises, always sleep-deprived. I never once saw my daughter in cute little girl dresses. I realized all this too late. My daughter just wanted to please me, so she gave up her feminine role. This later caused her death. By the time she graduated from high school, she had already achieved great success in wrestling. One evening, as usual, she said goodnight to her mother and me and went to her room. My wife and I also went to bed. The next morning, I went to work. Everything was quiet in the house. Toward lunchtime, my wife called me and hysterically informed me that our daughter was in the morgue. At this point, John's voice became quiet and tears welled up in his eyes. "So what happened to her?" Tom asked. My daughter had a close friend, Georgia, her complete opposite. I didn't like her, but we didn't oppose their friendship much. That night, Georgia went somewhere to a party where there were some guys she didn't know. After drinking some alcohol, the guys started hitting on my daughter's friend. She tried to get out of their hands on her own, but she couldn't. Then she found an opportunity and called my daughter. Jenny didn't bother to wake us up. She opened the door with her key and went to rescue her friend in the night. Of course, she put all the boys on her back there and rescued her friend. But the boys were not easy. They called their friends for help and caught up with the 2 girls somewhere along the way. This Georgia managed to somehow escape and hide in the woods, and my guinea struggled with them until one of them pulled out a knife. Her bloody body was left right beside the road. Georgia was afraid that her parents would reprimand her for such adventures and kept silent about the incident. My daughter's body was found by passersby and turned over to law enforcement. And just like that, she was gone. 3 days before her 19th birthday. After she was buried, I began to remember every day she appeared in my life. I realized that the most responsible periods of her life, as a father, I was absolutely indifferent to her. Then I traumatized her with my dreams of having a boy. When the boy was born, I turned my attention to him. So my daughter's whole life has been devoted to pleasing me. You know, Tom, if I hadn't said those stupid things about the boy, maybe my daughter would have grown up like a normal girl and not been into man stuff. Maybe her frivolous friends wouldn't have used her as a protector. Then she wouldn't have dared to go to unknown boys at night and get into a fight with them. Do you realize that I'm guilty for my daughter and I don't know how to atone for it? If she were alive right now, I would apologize to her every day and dedicate to her all the fatherly love that I used to just ignore in myself. And yes, that pendant I bought her was my only gift to her. It was only after her death that I realized that that pendant was very precious to her. Telling the story, John could not hold back his tears. Tom listened in silence and could not find words to comfort his friend. 2 months passed. Tom and John are coming back again from a long trip on the same route. Tom, don't forget to stop at Leslie's. We'll stop by Angela's. I'm worried about her, John said. Whatever you say, I'm all for it, said Tom, remembering the hot embrace of the beautiful Elizabeth from the roadside motel. After lunch at Leslie's, John hurried to the motel. A stern-looking woman met him on the doorstep as always. There are experienced girls, but there are also newcomers. Which one do you want? She asked from the doorstep. I like Angela. I've already crossed paths with her here, John said, embarrassed. Angela can't. She's still on sick leave, said the stern woman. What happened to her? John asked. Nothing much. She was walking along the road, slipped and fell. She'll lie down for a couple of days and come to her senses, said the stern woman. Could I visit her after all? John insisted. No, you can't. If you doubt that the other girls will be worse, you're wrong. They're all trained. The woman wasn't about to give up. We need to step back for 5 minutes, John said and pulled Tom to the side. I have a bad feeling about this. Help me find out the truth about Angela. We're going to go in now and look in all the rooms. I think it's time for her to leave this place, John said to his partner. John, I thought you were kidding. I understand your emotions about your daughter, but understand, this is a different girl, especially since she's made her own life choices. Your attempts to do good can only end badly. Let's just take a man's vacation and get out of here, Tom said. Well, if you don't want to help, then I'll take care of it myself, John said and turned back to the stern woman. Can I see all the girls? John asked. You even have to. They are already waiting for you, said the stern woman and led the way inside the old house. In the cramped living room, several girls were lined up in a row. Angela was not among them. It seemed that the woman was right. Something had happened to her. John immediately recognized Elizabeth, Angela's friend, and chose her. Left alone with her, John asked her not to undress, to which Elizabeth was genuinely surprised. I'm just chatting. My friend and I have been out of the house for a month. We missed the warm companionship. You just keep me company for an hour, John said. No problem at all. I don't mind just lying around, Elizabeth said happily. You must be hard at work here, don't you think? John asked. No, they don't make me carry bricks. True, there are some inadequate clients, but in this case we have security guards, and so everything is fine, said Elizabeth and smoked. Where is your friend Angela? You mean Angelica? She's such an idiot that she's always getting herself into trouble with her long tongue. She was trying to prove something to our mom. And they don't like that kind of people here. They have strict rules. If you don't obey, they have every right to punish you. So Angela got her punishment. Now she's lying there licking her wounds. What do you mean, licking her wounds? Do you get beaten up here? Think about it. If there are rules, you have to respect them. That's the way it is even in the thieving world, right? And this is a decent place. There should be rules. If someone is against it, then it is right to punish him, replied Elizabeth. Where is Angela lying now? I have no right to say that to the customers. For that I can get myself punished. But I like you. If you need to know, we can make a deal, Elizabeth said. John immediately realized what the girl was implying. He took out his wallet, opened it and took out a large bill. But Elizabeth quickly walked over, took the bill and hid it somewhere in the depths of her cleavage. Angela was taken somewhere, most likely to Owlet's house. She hides all the girls in her basement after punishment. Elizabeth began to reveal the inner workings of the house. Is Ala your mom? John asked, nodding toward the stern woman. Yes, that's her. But she's not to be trifled with. She's got a lot of connections. She gets away with everything. So don't even try to look for her house, Elizabeth said. Have you ever received such punishments yourself? How could I? I grew up on them. If it hadn't been for those firm hands, would I be the person I am now? Elizabeth said proudly. Were you also beaten and kept in Allah's basement? The rules are the same for everyone. But why are you asking me all this? It won't help. John took out his wallet, pulled out a second large bill and slipped it to the girl. I think you can remember the address of Allah's house now, and I'll write it down. And if you don't want to, I'll complain to your mom that you didn't please me well, he said, turning everything into a joke. You're pushy. You'll make trouble if you go looking for Angela. Allah will quickly find out what I leaked, and then I'll end up back in the basement. I don't want that. I need to make money, Elizabeth said. And I will make sure that your mom will not know anything. I can confirm my words with a decent reward, said John and took out a third bill from his wallet. She silently took it and happily hid it in the depths of her cleavage. She then proceeded to leak the pimp's secrets. Allah lives in the city. It's about an hour's drive from here. Get out a pen and write down how to find her house approximately. It turned out that Elizabeth knew Allah's address only visually. She had a hard time describing that her house was somewhere near a sporting goods store between the school and the hospital. John realized that the task ahead was daunting, but he wasn't going to back down. After John learned some details from Elizabeth, a plan to save Angela matured in his mind. Apparently, he and Tom wouldn't be able to solve this problem on the way. So they rented a room near the motel and spent the night here to put their plan into action the next day. Tom, I found out where Angela is. Today we'll go to free her from there. Without your help, John said to his partner. You've got yourself a gamble, John. Where are we going? How can I help you? The man was puzzled. All you have to do is stand by my side and agree with me. Now we're going back to Mommy's, and we're going to buy another Elizabeth for 4 hours. You need to tell her you want to make a gift for your friends. I'll wait outside. You go out with Elizabeth, John said. Tom agreed to John's suggestion without much enthusiasm. After lunch, they returned to the motel. Elizabeth turned out to be free. The guys paid for 4 hours and under the pretext of making a present for a friend took her out. When Elizabeth saw John on the street, she immediately began to resent him. I know what you're involving me in. It's dangerous for us. And if you're talking about Angela again, I'll come back and tell my mom, Elizabeth threatened. You don't have to do anything this time. You'll do your usual job, but somewhere in the field. No one will know you helped us, John said. Just to be safe, he had to pull out another bill and put it in Elizabeth's cleavage. Elizabeth took the money, put it in her pocket, and all her indignation vanished. If you insist, let's get going, she said. They left their truck under guard and took a cab. On the way, John had to ask for the address of Allah's house. With great patience and effort, he managed to get Elizabeth to lead them there herself. Here we are. Allah lives in that big house over there. Elizabeth pointed toward the new mansion, which stood out brightly against the background of the modest old houses. Wait for me outside, John said and reached for his gym bag. From the bag, he pulled out a sanitation worker's uniform and quickly changed in the car. I'm going to go tell the guard I need to fix something in the house. Elizabeth, it's up to you, John said and whispered something in her ear. Elizabeth nodded her head and smiled wryly. The guard was a young and carefree guy. Besides, he had recently gotten the job and didn't know that Elizabeth had stayed in the basement of the house under the guard's supervision many times before. When John told the guard that the landlady had called him in to make repairs to the house, he silently escorted him into the house. John pretended to inspect the plumbing. The guard quickly returned to his seat. By then, Elizabeth was standing by the booth, flashing her seductive charms. Young man, I came here to my friend, and she is not at home. You have to wait until the evening. I am very tired. Can I sit in your booth for half an hour to relax my legs a little? Said Elizabeth, stroking her slender and long legs, which her short skirt did not cover at all. Once inside the booth, she took off her stilettos and put them aside. Without waiting for the guard's permission, she lay down on his sleeping place. The guard's eyes widened at the beauty that peeked out from under the girl's tight dress. Elizabeth knew how to deal with timid men, so I began to procrastinate with my task. The guard did not even have time to believe in his happiness, as he found himself in the hot embrace of such a beauty. John followed the course of their actions from the window of the house. When he realized that the security guard was immersed in a more interesting process than watching the surroundings, He hurried down to the basement of the house. The door was open. The basement turned out to be quite a living space. Everything necessary for survival was here. It was noticeable that Allah had been in this business for a long time and had thought of everything in detail. Seeing John here, Angela couldn't believe her eyes. John came closer to her and saw that her situation was quite difficult. "Can you stand up?" John asked. "I can, but it hurts a lot. I have bruises all over my body," said Angela. "You should have run away with me that time. I'm afraid you'll be punished for it. Go away before it's too late." "No, I'm not leaving without you this time." "Come on, let's get up quietly and get out of here unnoticed. Your friend is the guard. The car is waiting outside." "There's no time to argue," John said firmly and took Angela's hand to help her up. There were bruises and abrasions on the girl's face. There was nowhere to put a mark on her frail body from the huge bruises. John noticed all this while the girl was changing her clothes. "What did you get so badly hurt for?" John asked. "I got an inadequate client. I didn't want to fulfill some of his desires. He complained to his mom." "It's okay. I've had worse," said Angela. Before taking Angela out of the basement, John went back to the guard's booth one more time. Everything was fine there. Elizabeth was practicing her rewards well. The guard didn't notice Angela leaving Allah's house, accompanied by John. When Elizabeth finished her business, she thanked the guy for his hospitality and left. John's plan worked well. He put Angela in his truck, and now he's on his way home. Tom is asleep in the back seat. Angela sits silently next to him. "Where are you taking me anyway?" "Did I ask you to save me?" Suddenly she's the first to ask, breaking the silence. "What's your real name?" "I think we have reason to have a serious talk with you." John asked the girl a counter question. "Celine." "That's a beautiful name." "And where are we going?" Selena asked. "I think you'd be better off anywhere but that basement and motel." "Don't try too hard. I've seen a lot of do-gooders like you. It's usually either to satisfy their ego or they have even more devious plans than our mom," Selena said. "I don't have any devious plans for you. I'll help you with a place to live, a job for a while. If you want to, we'll try to get you an apprenticeship." "That would be perfect," John said. "And if I don't want to?" Selena asked. "Then you're stupid for now. If you live a normal life for a while, you'll change your mind." "What don't I know about this normal life of yours? I think you're out of touch with reality. Look at the world. Money is everything. And to make money, any method is good. At least I don't cheat anyone. I've been honestly and get paid for it. What do your normal girls do? Sleep with men and quietly wait for them to do something to help them. He doesn't want to do anything. He's not used to sharing. The funny thing is, they're both unable to talk openly about their positions. I'm unlike them, and everything's fair and clear. You decide for yourself where normal life really is," Selena said. "You're still young. When people are young, they tend to believe what sounds convincing. Besides, some life positions can be a losing proposition for your future," John said. They drove on in silence for a while until John saw a lonely old woman along the road. The old woman saw the truck and started waving from afar. "Well, here's our companion. Let's take the old woman with us. She must be tired of waiting for a hitchhiker," said John and hit the brake. "I see your middle name is Kindness. Don't complain later that no one appreciates it," Selena said wryly. "I don't need appreciation. I've lived most of my life, and I've realized a few things. From small years we worked from morning till night, and it helped us a lot in our adult years. After such childhood and youth, nothing was scary. But they had kept a human face, and thank you for that." Grandma was not going to stop talking for a minute. John only nodded and watched Selena's reaction. It seemed that some of the grandmother's words were making her think. Grandmother's uninterrupted story lasted until a second man came along the road. It was a young boy. John pressed the brake. A seat was found for the new passenger. As soon as the guy sat down, the granny started telling all of her stories all over again. So they drove stealthily to town. Grandma and the boy got out of the truck right after entering the city. Tom is always sleeping soundly in the back seat. Again, there was an awkward silence between John and Selena. "Before I came to pick you up, I arranged a place for you to stay. 2 small rooms, not luxurious, but no worse than a roadside inn. I'll leave you there now. You rest and regain your strength," John said. "How much do you have to pay per month?" Selena asked. "I'll tell you after you get a job. I'm also talking to people I know about a job. They should be able to help." You don't have any education yet, so you'll have to take any offer you can get, John said. So I'll have to work for a penny from morning till night, then give it all to some strangers for a night's stay? It would seem so at first glance, but while you are plowing and giving money to other people, you should have other goals and desires. And then before you know it, normal life will take over and things will get rolling. While Selena was arguing with John, they found themselves in a neighborhood near the center of town. The long truck was having trouble fitting into the narrow alleys. It didn't take long to find it, so John put Selena outside the old wooden gate, handed her the key to the 2 empty rooms, and hurried home. When it was only a short distance from the house, John decided to stop at a store and buy some things to take home. He opened the glove compartment of the car and found it empty. John remembered several times that the day before he had put a wad of money in the glove compartment with his own hands. It was the money for his entire flight. Usually it was a fairly substantial sum, and this time his earnings had turned out to be even more. He was glad that with this amount of money his plans were accelerating. And now it turned out that it was as if he had been rolling around for nothing for a whole month. The first thought that went through his head did not like it very much. Did someone steal his money? Who could it be? Tom is out of the question. He and Tom are old friends and always go on long trips together. Or maybe it's a chatty grandmother, or a young boy. But none of them showed any signs of a suspicious person. John was very offended, and he immediately turned his truck to the police station. There he recounted the events of the last day as they happened. I think we have some leads. I wouldn't be surprised if by evening your money had been found, the police major said lastly. Please, I'll be very grateful to you. You can go home now. We will contact you with the results of the investigation, said the police major and escorted John out. He came home completely out of spirits. His wife Emma and son Tony met him on the doorstep. John was ashamed to come home without even a present, but when he told her that he had lost all his earnings, his wife did not reproach him for anything. However, for some reason John did not want to tell about his adventures with the girl Selena. His wife might misunderstand and suspect him of cheating. He postponed this conversation for later. A few days later, John returned to the house near which he had left Selena. He knocked on the door, but no one opened it, and when he pulled the handle, he found that the door was unlocked, and the inside of the house was empty. Selena was nowhere to be found. Where could she have gone in the city unfamiliar to her? As he pondered on his way back to his apartment, someone called him. Hello, it's the major. I'm calling about your lost money. You need to come to the department. We have a suspect, said the same officer who had taken his statement a few days ago. John arrived at the police station in a hurry. The police major received him in his office and informed him of the first results of the investigation. We detained a girl. You brought her with you from a neighboring region, placed her in a rented apartment. Is it really Selena? John asked. And why not? Members of this ancient profession tend to steal money and valuables from clients, said Major Christopher. What will happen to her now? John asked. She will be punished according to the law. She'll reflect on her actions in prison, and then she'll come out a normal person. Is there any way to avoid prison? Citizen, I don't understand you. If we treat all criminals leniently, how can we ensure order? The major was indignant. I think she didn't tell you the most important thing. Selena is my daughter, but she doesn't know it yet. I wanted to tell the truth later. I found her a while ago, and I didn't want to spook her, John said. Well, in this case, the responsibility before the law will not go anywhere. If you want her to go free, it's only through the courts now. And so she pleaded guilty right away. But we can't find the money. She's already spent it somewhere, said the major. John left the major's office at a complete loss. How could Selena do such a thing? On the other hand, what reason did he have to so blindly trust a girl who had recently sold her body for money? Somehow John didn't feel like thinking about his money. Now his thoughts were occupied with how to free Selena so she wouldn't end up in jail. John dialed Tom's number. Hi, you're rested, recovered, I hope. Hey, I'm fine. John, how are you doing? Any progress on the investigation? Tom asked. That's actually why I'm calling you. The major called me today and told me the thief was apprehended. The most unpleasant thing is that it turned out to be Selena. I wanted to tell you about it, but I didn't want to offend you. John, it's nice of you to be such a kind person. But on the other hand, think about it. This girl has a dark past. You may not be the first victim, and you may not be the last. I'm surprised at how you found an adventure out of nowhere and don't want to admit it, Tom said. Even if she did it, she must have had a good reason. Or she did it foolishly. She told me along the way that she favored easy money. She made a mistake. We should give her a chance to correct it, John said. Oh, that's too much. What is she to you? Daughter? Wife? Lover or sister? John, wake up. You're just associating her with the image of your daughter, but she's not. All right, we'll deal with that later. Right now, I'm calling you about something else. Lend me some money. I'll pay you back on the next flight. Money's no problem, John. You can come to my house right now, said my friend Tom. In order not to cause a new storm of indignation, John did not say that he needed the money for his lawyer. In a couple of hours, Tom handed over the necessary amount, and John began to realize his future plans. Donald, hello. As promised, I've brought my daughter to work for you. Her name is Selena. She's a little cranky, but that's fixable, John said as he introduced her to his old friend. John, there's no problem. Washing dishes isn't like solving people's fates or doing math. You don't really need character. You just need a little restraint, Donald said. Donald owns a small cafe in the center of town. His place is very busy. The staff works practically nonstop. Initially, Donald suggested that John consider a waitress position. But John remembered that Selena can be unpredictable when working with people, chose for her the role of dishwasher. Of course, when Selena heard about it, was very indignant. You call that kindness? I can't imagine having to stand at the sink in a cafe and wash dishes. It's much better than going to jail for stealing, John said. Selena was silent, but only for a while. Each of them thought about recent events. Indeed, Selena had admitted that she had stolen a round sum of money from John's glove compartment. The police had proved it, but John had hired a lawyer and they had managed to frame the case as a reconciliation. John insisted to the law enforcers that Selena was his illegitimate daughter, and that's why he didn't want her to go to jail. And when she came out, she told them why she was taking such a step. Turns out her reason was serious. We were graduating from high school and we had a graduation party coming up. By then, I already owed school fees. I also wanted to wear a beautiful dress and shoes like all the girls. But by that time, I didn't even have normal everyday clothes, and even less money for clothes. So I went to my distant relatives to look for money to borrow. They introduced me to a woman who promised to help me. This woman needed a guarantee. As a guarantee, she asked for the documents for my parents' house and my documents. I gave them all. She gave me the right amount of money and set a deadline. When the deadline came, I had nothing to pay back. The woman said that I had to pay back the money. Otherwise, she'd take my parents' house and her tough guys would deal with me. That's when I started working at that motel. I was scared when you took me out of there. They might be looking for me. If they do, it won't be good. When I saw you had so much money, I thought I could give it to that woman and be free forever, Selena explained. You're just a child. That's why you're so stupid. Who would let people like you do something like that? It's illegal. They can't just take away your parents' house, and they can't do anything to you if you fight them with determination, John explained to her. Then he added, now, to avoid such unpleasant adventures in the future, you'll have to learn to live differently. Settle in at work. In the spring, we will make you documents, and you will prepare to enter the university. It won't be easy, but it will be the right thing to do, John added. Selena has been studying at the university for 2 years now. At first, she resisted her new life, often skipped classes, and practically did not prepare for exams. Not everything was in order with her work. Donald often called John and complained that Selena was very conflicted and irresponsible. After these complaints, John would take time out of his day to visit Selena and talk to her about it. The conversations did not go well. Selena was shaped by the street. She adopted the laws of the street as a rule for her life. She'd missed something very important in her formation, but she didn't want to admit it. I live my life the way I want to live it. I didn't ask you for help at all. She was indignant when John came to visit. You're a silly little girl. You're giving up the most important part of your life for something you don't even know about. You'll hit rock bottom before you know it, and it'll take you a lifetime to get out. You will lag behind in the social race, miss all the favorable opportunities, but you have the potential to achieve something. And you're always choosing dubious adventures, John admonished. On one of his last visits, he added, Selena, there may never be another person to give you a helping hand in your life. You're not a child anymore, you're 21. Sit down sometime and think calmly. Do you want to achieve something in life, or is it enough to live today? You're lucky. You have time for all that, John said and walked away. For the week that followed, he thought about that conversation constantly. It seemed he was beginning to quietly hate himself for imposing his vision of life on this girl. The last time he had talked to her, he had gotten a little testy and even insulted her. After a week, he couldn't stand it anymore and went back to see how she was doing. He had to knock on the wooden gate for a long time. The lights in the house were on, but no one was in a hurry to open the door. He decided to wait here. After a while, the gate opened and John couldn't believe his eyes. Donald was coming out of Selena's house. She accompanied him in a light silk robe over her naked body. When they saw John, they were both dumbfounded. They clearly hadn't expected his visit. John realized at once what had happened. "Donald, we're childhood friends. Selena is old enough to be your granddaughter. Why would you do such a thing?" John asked. Donald felt extremely awkward. While he was choosing words in his head, Selena beat him to it. "Why do you even care? He and I are both adults. We decide for ourselves what to do, what not to do," she pounced on John. "Donald, I'm sorry you've stooped so low. Selena works for you and is not doing well. You found her weak spot and decided to exploit it. Honor doesn't do you any favors," John said to his comrade. Donald took John by the elbow and pulled him aside. "I'm sorry, friend, I had no intention of going near her, but she started hanging all over me and won't give me a pass. In return, she wants me to overlook her absences and raise her salary. I couldn't fire her because you're my friend. That's why it's such a mess. But I don't deny my guilt," Donald said. John took Donald by the elbow, now back in the company of Selena, who was still standing outside the wicket. "Donald, what are the prospects for your beautiful relationship with Selena? If there are any, it's appropriate to tell us about them right now. And if there are none, why should a young girl like Selena be with you?" John asked and looked at both of them in turn. Donald understood the question, so he remained silent. But Selena showed her true colors here too. "And what makes you think that every relationship should have prospects? We are adults. We have the right to act sometimes against all logic. I just don't understand why you care so much. Maybe you're just jealous. Maybe you've liked me from the beginning and you can't tell me." She couldn't stop the flow of words. As much as John tried to keep his emotions in check, he couldn't. He mumbled to himself, got into his car, and drove away. Selena felt victorious. Donald understood the true meaning of what was happening and sank into thought. At that moment, Selena hung around his neck and said, "Kotick, don't mind him. He made up a fairy tale about me being his daughter. With that fairy tale of his, he's always getting under my feet. I'm tired of him myself. I don't know how to get rid of him. And you forget about him. We can work things out between us, right?" Selena looked at the pot-bellied old man with hope in her eyes. Donald gently released himself from Selena's tight embrace and took a couple steps away. Then said, "You know, I have to be honest with you now. John's right. You should be thinking about your studies, not trading yourself for dubious liaisons, even if they benefit you. No offense, but I'm firing you. And try not to bother me with your calls," Donald said. Then he headed towards his car, which was parked around the corner. Selena had clearly not expected this turn of events. She was left completely bewildered and all the evening angry at Donald that he could not fight back against this John. Today, John was returning from another flight. He had been away for over 2 months and missed his wife and son Tony. He usually visits Selena before he leaves on each long-haul flight, leaving money or buying whatever he needs. She is still reluctant to get into John's words, but she likes getting regular help from him. John is sympathetic to this. All this time while he was on the voyage, John felt guilty that this time he didn't leave her any money for running expenses. Several times he had the urge to call her and ask her how things were going, but each time he stopped himself. What was the use of talking if they couldn't hear each other anyway? And material help is the only point of contact between them. John decided to visit her right after he got some rest from his flight. Now he bought a lot of goodies for his family and hurried home. He was met on the doorstep by his son Tony. John was surprised to find that Tony was already taller than his father and was growing up day by day. "Son, I've missed you so much. And now Mom too. Where is she?" he asked from the doorstep. Instead of answering, Tony's facial expression made it clear that his mother wasn't in the mood. John handed the shopping bags to his son, hid the bouquet he bought for his wife behind his back, and headed into the living room where Emma was sitting. She greeted him rather coolly. All of John's questions she ignored. After John had changed and showered, she said coldly, "Go to the kitchen. Dinner is waiting there." John had to eat dinner alone with his son. Emma did not sit down at the table, but did not explain the reasons. "Dad, why do you work as a trucker?" the son asked an unexpected question. "Why? I've always liked driving long distances, and you can earn good money." "Why such questions?" John asked. "I think your long trips badly affect your relationship with your mother," said Tony, as if hinting at the cause of resentment of the mother. "By the way, what happened to her? Did someone hurt her?" "Don't worry, you'll find out soon," Tony replied. After dinner, John cleaned up the table, washed the dishes, and sat on the sofa in front of the TV. Emma, who had been sitting in front of the TV before, quickly got up and went into the other room. John realized that he would have to act on his own. "Honey, what's wrong?" "You don't tell me anything, but I can see your resentment." He started the conversation. "You guess," said Emma. "Emma, why are you playing childish games? The resentment comes from you, so you better know why. It's not a good idea to play riddles, because we've been together long enough and we're old enough to hear each other." "Who is she?" Emma asked, looking at him with tear-filled eyes. "That's not a good format for a conversation either. You should be more specific about who you're talking about," John said. "You've got several of them. You're probably confused about them yourself, so you don't want to get further embarrassed." Emma started to cry. "I don't think we're going to have a proper conversation. I was at least trying to solve the problem," John said and walked back into the living room. Emma began to wait for him to come back to reassure her. An hour passed. John remained in the living room as he sat in front of the TV. Emma was tired of crying alone. "I'm not going to let this go, am I?" she hissed and walked into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch and finally found a way to voice her resentment. "Leslie came by while you were gone. She told me a lot about you," Emma said and waited for her husband's reaction, but there was no reaction. "Well, she saw you going to some girl near the center of town. She followed you and saw you dropping off bags of groceries, taking her somewhere and bringing her back. Leslie's a smart broad, so she figured it out. She went to check with the girl's neighbors. They said you're just one of the many suckers who go to her place. Have you stooped so low? And you promised me only last year that you would stop all these affairs, didn't you?" Emma wailed. "Why didn't your Leslie go to that girl and ask her all the details?" "What, you think she'd tell the truth? They'd be lying through their teeth. And Leslie didn't find herself on the street talking to people. You talked to her." Emma continued her monologue. "If you really want to know the truth, I suggest you come with me to this girl. Maybe, as two women, you'll hear each other better than you hear me. You'll find out all the circumstances," John said. "No way. I don't want to have to go around with you and listen to different girls, do I? You go to her yourself. You don't even have to come back. My son and I can do without you," Emma said, and began to rearrange the items on the living room table. John looked at her and realized that in some cases talking was useless. A person is either disposed to the truth or influenced by their own beliefs, and they don't think about whether those beliefs are true or not. "John, I told you from the beginning, that girl wouldn't appreciate your concern. She's gotten a taste of street life and she's hooked on it, and you've been in trouble for the last 3 years because of her. Now it's getting to your wife. I know you're Emma, no offense, but you're gonna have a hard time explaining all this." Tom comforted John in the bar that night. "I don't need no thanks from her. I just want Selena to open her eyes to her delusion and start living a normal, safe life. What if one of her men kills me or murders me? John, it's not up to you anymore. You've already done enough for her. Got her out of the brothel, restored her documents, got her a place to live, helped her get into university. How many jobs have you given her? Sometimes people close to you don't do as much as you've done. I haven't counted how much I've done for her, but I do know one thing for sure. I'd like to keep taking care of her. And you know why? Because I want to rehabilitate myself before God, before myself. I had a beautiful daughter. It took me a long time to realize what a treasure she was. Then she died when I started to take pride in her. It was too late that I latched onto my daughter with all my soul. She made me feel like a happy father. I recognize this great fatherly feeling for my own daughter. It's something completely different than we used to think. With women, it's clear. Their love for their children happens on a biological level. But with men, it's more complicated. I was able to feel this mysterious and strong love that only his daughter can give to a man. I realized that Selena is a complete stranger to me. Moreover, she is nothing like my daughter. Nevertheless, The girl's father is still alive in me. Why shouldn't another girl benefit from my pure fatherly love and care? I don't ask for anything in return, John said. You've gone too far in these matters, my friend. I don't even know how to comfort you. Maybe you and Emma should have another child. You're still old enough, said Tom. John's cell phone rang and his expression changed. Oh, it's Selena. You sit tight, I'll be right back, said John, took his phone and hurried outside. Uncle John, what's up? Selena sounded affectionate for the first time. I'm fine, how are you? What took you so long to call? I didn't want to bother you. Now I have a problem. I need your help. What's wrong? Did you do something wrong at work again? Or are you having trouble with your studies? Don't worry about the job, I'll find another one soon. There's nothing wrong with school either. But my neighbors are bad. They complained to the landlady, who came yesterday and demanded that I move out of her house. Where will I go? Selena cried. It's not a problem to find a new place to live in the city. You take a newspaper with ads, look for offers and call. If you realize that the housing suits you, you make an appointment and go to see. There's nothing complicated here. Why don't you talk to the landlady? Maybe she won't kick me out. I've always paid her money on time. Maybe she'll let her neighbors take care of it for me. Don't jump to conclusions. I'll come to you tomorrow and we'll discuss everything. Bye-bye, John said and hung up the phone. Just as he was about to return to Tom's company, he received a second call on his phone. John, this is Alice, the owner of the house you rented for your daughter. We need to have a serious talk with you, Alice said in a disgruntled tone. Hello, Alice. I'm listening to you, John replied. The fact is that your daughter is leading a completely indecent life. My neighbors have tolerated it for years. You know that they are very intelligent people and it is unbearable for them. I'm sick of listening to their complaints too. They say that every night different men come to your daughter's house, drink alcoholic beverages in my house, then make noise either outside or inside the house. I will not tolerate such disorder. Therefore, I ask you to take your daughter out of my house and give me the keys in a week, said Alice. Okay, I'm sorry for my daughter's outrageous behavior. You will get the keys at the agreed time, John said. Hanging up the phone, he decided not to delay his visit to Selena. With all the fuss about her, there was probably something to think about. John went back to the bar, paid for his check, then hurriedly left Tom's. When he arrived at Selena's house, he had to stand at the wooden gate for a long time again. Inside the house, lights were on and loud music was playing, which meant Selena was home. When John got tired of knocking, he climbed over the fence and walked straight into the house. Inside the house, he found an oil painting, a mountain of empty dishes on the table, a mountain of empty bottles under the table. Selena is performing some obscurantist dance surrounded by 3 drunken men. When he saw the unexpected guest, none of them was particularly surprised. Selena immediately remembered that this time she needed John's help. Guys, my dad's here. Are you going to meet him or go home? She asked and laughed in their faces. The men dressed quickly and hurried to the exit, trying not to look John in the face. What's your connection to these types? John asked. They're just friends of mine. I'm under so much stress, with all this studying and these problematic bosses at work. If you don't give yourself a chance to relax, you can go crazy. So it was a necessity, nothing personal, Selena said, playing the innocent sheep. It wasn't long before John noticed that one of the men had managed to slip Selena some bills just before they left. She had nowhere to hide them. At home, she often wore a silk robe over her naked body. I know you're still prostituting yourself. The whole neighborhood and even the landlady knows about it. She asked me to vacate the house. The only reason she's unhappy is because of your disgusting lifestyle. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to get through to you anymore. Doesn't studying engage you? Doesn't work motivate you to do better? Why do you keep getting dragged down? I can't understand it anymore. If you want to stay a sellout, stay a sellout. I think you're old enough to deal with the consequences of your choices, so you'll have to deal with the moving out issue on your own, John said finally and left. Selena was left completely bewildered. It had been almost 2 years since John had last seen Selena. He had promised not to interfere in her life anymore. He had kept his word. Now he expresses his longing for his daughter and his paternal feelings directly by regularly visiting her grave. He doesn't tell his wife about it. Let her think that John has long forgotten about his dead daughter and lived his own life. Today, as usual, John spent a lot of time at his daughter's grave. He told her the latest events in his life. In between, he remembers things from her childhood and tells her. At the end of each story, He cries and repents to his daughter for not loving her enough when she was alive. I've had enough for today, my little girl. Perhaps I have bored you already. Sleep well, I will be back very soon. John said goodbye to his daughter's grave and walked down the narrow path that leads to the main road of the cemetery. Suddenly, he heard a whisper not far from him. He looked around, but saw no one. He slowed his steps. After a couple moments, he heard the quiet sobbing again. Then he walked in the direction of that sound. Literally 3 graves away, he saw an abandoned, unkept grave without a monument. The hill was almost level with the ground. The fence is broken on one side, and on the edge sits a small, thin girl with disheveled hair. The girl was frightened when she saw the stranger, but she didn't run away. "Are you here alone?" John asked with surprise. "Yes, alone. But now I will leave. You must be the guard. Don't chase me away. I'm going now," the girl begged. Then she put her thin hands on the disappearing hill of the grave and said, "Mommy, I must go now. Don't you miss me. I'll come again soon," said the girl and hurried off somewhere. John followed her. The girl seemed to be frightened. John tried to make her feel at ease. "Wait, don't be afraid of me. I'm not a watchman. What's your name?" "Jeannie." "Jeannie, my name is Uncle John. Is your mom lying here?" "Yeah, she died 4 years ago. She was all I had." "Who are you living with now?" "My mom's friends put me in an orphanage, but I was very bad there, so I ran away," Jenny said. "Where do you live now and who do you live with?" "A grandmother took me to her house and I helped her with the household chores, but 6 months ago she died too. Now her son came home with his children and they kicked me out. Now I sleep at night at the bus station and work part-time at the market during the day. If it gets cold, I don't know where to go." "How old are you?" 14. John was horrified because Jenny looked about 10 years old. Because of her ordeal and hardships, she was even physically stunted. After talking to her for a while, John realized that there was nothing wrong with the girl's psyche. She has not lost the purity of her world and believes that she can take care of herself. John was shocked by her words. "Jeannie? My daughter's name was Jeannie, just Jeannie. She lies not far from your mom. I really want to have a daughter again. Do you want parents of your own?" John asked. "Yes, I would like to. But it's impossible." Jenny stared at John with her innocent, childish eyes. "But it's possible to try." "Wait, you don't go," John said and pulled out his cell phone. He stepped aside and spoke to his wife. "I know that our shared grief at the loss of our daughter still lies in our lives in the background. Let me take this girl in with me. She has absolutely no one. Maybe you could try to give her some love, too. And then suddenly the heart wounds of each of us will be healed and life will take on new colors." John was almost begging his wife. "Ring her, at least we'll try." "What else can we do?" replied Emma. Thus, John and Emma suddenly had an adopted daughter. Tony was a little perplexed at first, since he had to share his parents' attention with some strange girl. But a couple of educational conversations with her father removed all his doubts. After a few months, the role of big brother he really liked. Jenny turned out to be a girl with an open heart and a lively mind. It was hard to watch without tears at her joy when Emma made arrangements with the school and informed her foster daughter. When John returned from his flights and asked what to buy his daughter, she always asked for different books. Now after each flight, John came home with stacks of different interesting books. Jenny quickly caught up with her peers in terms of knowledge, and her physical development accelerated. She grew taller, put on weight, had a pink blush on her face, and became a real sunshine in the life of her new parents. Unable to withstand her emotions, Salima took out a cigarette and smoked. Her hands were shaking with anger, and it seemed that her head was about to split apart. As luck would have it, her friend Ekaterina wasn't picking up the phone. She angrily threw the phone on the kitchen table and went to the window. A few minutes later, Katerina herself called back. "Well, friend, how did it go?" she asked. "Yes, it sucked. Such a bore I've never met before. I don't understand. What's wrong?" "I've been out of the body trade for a long time. I have a college degree and some work experience. I honestly said amen. I dedicate all my beauty to you, and you are responsible for me, all honestly and without deceit." "What's wrong with that?" Selena was indignant. They were raised by their mothers. They never had a model of male behavior in front of their eyes. A real man, what kind of man is he? He doesn't bat an eye when a girl wants something. So forget it and move on to the next guy, her friend said. "I forgot to tell you, Did you know that Michael came to see me yesterday? Is that your ex-boyfriend? Yeah, imagine that. He came over and he said he wanted to be with me. He wanted to talk to me, to get through to me. I said, you buy me a new chain or purse and the shoes I'm gonna show you. Then we'll talk about it. He took offense and left. What did you want? He was clear from the start. I told you how many times he's a useless bore. Don't waste your time on him. He doesn't appreciate you. We'll find for you another worthy. Then all will sing differently, encouraged friend Catherine. Head Yusha, I can't stay with you long. Even should come for me. I'm trying to get something out of him. At least he is the most normal. I'll call you tomorrow morning, Selena said and hung up. Even didn't wait long. He'd arrived even a little earlier than planned. As he had promised earlier, he took Selena to one of the best restaurants in the city. Their relationship is now in its 4th month. Even works in a solid company, earns good money, and lives separately from his parents. Selena likes everything about him, except that he seems stingy and money matters. Today, she decided to talk about it. Evan, do you love me? Selena started the conversation from a distance. Do you have any doubts? I only build relationships for love, Evan answered. And do you think love implies taking care of the person you love? Of course it does. Then I think tomorrow you and I will go shopping. I've seen something for me. I'd be happy if you bought it, Selena said. I knew it would be about that. Buying is not a problem, but I'm worried about something else. You got your degree, you have a college degree. Why don't you want to work for yourself? Evan asked. I don't think a woman should have to kill herself at work. We are created weak. We are not adapted to difficulties. And a man should recognize that and take responsibility for a woman if he loves her, Selena said. Listen, darling, you have your brains, you have your potential. But ever since you started listening to different coaches and trainers for women, it's like you forgot about your true personality. Work isn't just about the money. I want you to put your knowledge into practice, have your own goals, develop and grow as a person. It's very important nowadays. If a person doesn't grow, he is not standing still, he is going downhill, Evan said. I'm already developed enough. When I was young, I've seen and suffered everything. And now that I'm an adult, I just want to live comfortably for myself. I love myself and allow myself the best, Selena said. After that dinner, Evan was seriously thinking about his relationship with this girl. He gets the impression that they talk about the same things but don't hear each other. Evan has achieved something in his life and does not intend to stop there. He has some experience in relationships, and he understands that if his woman does not develop on a par with him, then very soon he will lose interest in her and they will cease to understand each other. At the beginning of their relationship, he saw some potential in Selena. She has an inner core, she has character. But for some reason, she decided to put herself in a narrow frame and live with easy goals like buying brands and a flashy lifestyle. Evan understands that it's always on trend, but he knows this life from the inside. All this glitz and luxury can be a byproduct of hard work and growth, not the ultimate goal of those people. He's been trying to get this idea across to Selena for a long time, but she's becoming more and more entrenched in her vision. After that evening, Evan stopped contacting Selena. She herself called him several times, but he politely ended the conversation, citing business. Of course, a man can't say to his face that a relationship is over. He hoped Selena would figure it out on her own, but she found a way to meet him and make a huge scandal, called him abusive words and left in a way that left the worst impression of her. Unfortunately, this was not Selena's first such relationship to end this way. She is already completely desperate. When she was a student, she always comforted herself with the fact that soon the right prince would show up and her life would be easier. She hoped that someday these endless worries of independent life would end and she would be able to afford complete relaxation. But no one was going to provide her with such a life. The more she wanted from her men, the more they made her suffer. At such moments, she would like to return to her former profession. There everything was clear. You give me money, I'm yours for an hour or a night. And in this normal relationship, to which all people in the world are so eager, so many things are unclear. Selena realized that finally confused in everything and does not feel the desire to be in any relationship. Almost 10 years have passed. Jenny has grown up to be a real beauty and smart girl. She has recently finished her studies, made a career in sports, got a job offer in a prestigious company. On top of that, her young man Archie proposed to her in a romantic setting. John and Emma were very nervous before the wedding. Tony and his family helped his parents in every possible way to organize the wedding. There are only a few days left before the much-awaited wedding reception. John has recently retired and is enjoying a well-deserved vacation. He now has plenty of time to devote to his family and his loved ones. Recently, he and Emma have been in the habit of taking a walk in the evenings at the stadium near their home. Today, they also went for a walk. It's always crowded. Someone is running. Someone is working out on the exercise machines. A lot of young people playing their favorite games. Young mothers with strollers walk along the curb. John and Emma were discussing the details of their upcoming wedding. They were so engrossed in their conversation that John didn't immediately hear someone calling him. "Uncle John." A woman's voice kept calling him. John turned his head and saw a very familiar face not far from him. A young woman was heading toward him. "Hi, Uncle John. Did you recognize me?" The young woman asked. "Selena, I recognize you, but with great difficulty. I certainly didn't expect to see you today," said John. "And this, if I understand correctly, is your wife, Aunt Emma?" Selena asked. Then she turned to Uncle John's wife. "Hello, Emma. My name is Selena. Uncle John has helped me a lot in his time. I know you've even had your differences because of me. I'd like to apologize for everything. In fact, Uncle John tried to surround me with fatherly love, only I couldn't fit in as his daughter. I didn't realize all that until much later," Selena said in agreement. Emma had already forgotten all the arguments and conversations. But the words that John was looking for, an object for his fatherly love, had convinced her. At one time, she had not expected Jenny to come into their lives. Even in the first days of Jeannie's life in their family, Emma doubted whether she could love and accept a stranger's child. But when she saw the sincere love John had for her and how this girl was a good influence on him, she was able to accept her. Since then, their lives had changed dramatically. They both felt completely different people. Familiar, friends and relatives at first were wary. Later, when they saw the family idyll, they complimented and admired them. After these events, Emma for the first time looked at her husband with different eyes. And after all, deep down he also turned out to be a delicate and sensitive man. Now she willingly believed the girl's words without the slightest doubt. "Well, since you had a common history and fate has brought your paths together again, I suggest right now to move somewhere decent. Selena, you can tell us all about it over dinner." "John, how do you feel about this?" Emma asked. John, who until now had been waiting for his wife's reaction with great apprehension, was instantly pleased. "I'm all for it. To be honest, I'm still worried about Selena. I'd like to know how your future life has turned out. What has happened over the years?" "Emma and I have something to tell you too," John said, barely concealing his joy at the unexpected meeting. Sitting down to dinner, Emma asked Selena many questions. "Selena, how did you and John meet?" she asked. Selena thought for a moment. John immediately remembered the circumstances of their acquaintance and decided to answer for her. "She worked at a roadside cafe. I once witnessed how the owner of the cafe treated her badly. She refused to pay her employees' wages and loaded them with extra work." "Yes, that's what happened," nodded Selena, blushing slightly in shame for those times. "But then I went over to her and saw the same pendant around her neck that our Jenny had. Remember, I gave it to her for her birthday, and she wore it around her neck. So I remembered my daughter, and I decided to help her. I brought her to town and got her a job. At first, I went to her place to buy groceries and left some money. But Selena did well. Soon she got used to her new life. She had time to work and study. When I was sure that she wouldn't go to waste, I blessed her with an adult life and didn't visit her anymore," John said. "Uncle John, you could have introduced me to Aunt Emma right away, so there would be no disagreement later," Selena said. "I told her so, and she approved of my decision at the time. It's just that we were going through a stressful period at the time and couldn't invite you home. Wasn't it like that all the time?" John now turned to his wife. Emma looked at her husband with a disgruntled look for lying a bit in this story. But looking at Selena, she had no doubts about the truth of her words. "And what do you do now?" Emma asked the girl. "I am an economist by education. I work in a private company as a chief accountant. Recently, I bought an apartment. But my personal life did not work out, and I don't want to," said Selena. "What do you mean you don't want to?" "It's probably a particular man behaved unworthily with you, and you decided to take offense at all the men in the world. I'm sure you'll find the right man. God willing, we'll have a good time at your wedding, won't we, John?" Emma said from the bottom of her heart. "Yes, and we'll ask the broom for a decent ransom, John said. As their dinner together drew to a close, Emma said the big words. I look at you and I keep thinking, if Ginny were alive, she'd be in her prime now, just like you. I look at you and I don't want to let you go. Why don't you come to our daughter's wedding as her big sister? You can meet her, Emma said. Selena had obviously not expected such warmth of heart from Emma. She even got a little teary-eyed. I'll be there. I'll definitely be there, she said goodbye. Then they went home. On the way, Emma thought back to the time when her friend Leslie had told her about John's meetings with this girl. It turned out that all that speculation was nonsense. Now their relationship with her husband is in order, and during this time Emma herself has become much wiser. Despite the decent distance, Selena decided to walk that evening in the night city. It had been so long since she'd been out for a walk. She thought back to those distant days and silently grimaced to herself. Indeed, many girls who take the path of trading with their bodies end up very badly. Either they are killed or they fall to the bottom of the pile irretrievably. It was a miracle that she had met such a kind man as John. Years later, she remembered his every instruction and was convinced that he was right, especially about men. You have to be strong and independent. Only then will a man want to reckon with you. And if you are needy of him, of his financial or moral protection, of his guardianship, he will not value you. So you must study and make a good career. That's what Uncle John always said. At the time, Selena thought these words were senile moralizing, but over these past 10 years, she had dozens of men who'd given her exactly nothing. On the contrary, many of them left her life, taking away some of her youth and energy. Only after making a lot of mistakes, she began to think and search for the truth. This day she was ready for a new approach to her life. While she was walking with such thoughts, a young man caught up with her. He said he saw her from afar and followed her. The young man appeared to be very sociable. He insisted that Selena let him walk beside her to her house. The young man introduced himself as Arnold. He works as a technician, has good looks, and an easygoing personality. Lastly, he got her phone number, promised to call her tomorrow morning, and wished her good night. Arnold did not lie. He did call early the next day. Selena was in a hurry to get to work at that moment. They managed to talk briefly, but Arnold was dissatisfied that she paid little attention to him. And then he said that he would call her in the evening and meet her after work. Selena lastly specified the time at which he was going to call. And when the promised time was approaching, she took her phone and put Arnold on her blacklist. There was a calmness in her soul, and as if she could breathe more freely. She walked home from work alone and was pleased with her progress. She realized for the first time today that she didn't like men who didn't respect her and didn't hear her words. Arnold was one of these. Now she was done with such men forever, Selena convinced herself. Before, she had been attracted to any man who showed interest in her. Only through many mistakes she learned to realize her supremacy in her life. The day of Archie and Ginny's wedding came. Everyone was happy on this day. Selena saw all the close relatives of the family for the first time. John personally introduced her to each of them. They accepted her as their own. The in-laws were introduced to Selena as Ginny's older sister. Ginny herself was immensely happy about the appearance of her new sister. The wedding was modest, but very cheerful and heartfelt. The guests sang songs and had fun all evening. When the celebration was in full swing, a handsome man approached Selena. "I assume you're on the bride's side?" he asked. "You could say that," Selena replied. "Archie's parents are good people, kind and kind-hearted. I think the young people will have a happy life. And he's a great guy, too. I'm his maternal uncle and my name is Arthur," the man introduced himself. "I'm Selena, Ginny's actual sister. It's a long story, but in short, Uncle John and Aunt Emma are like parents to me now," Selena said. Arthur courted Selena very delicately all evening, and they chatted sweetly. It turned out he worked as a doctor. Before he had a family, but then his wife chose a different life and left him a young daughter. Selena was very surprised when she learned that a single father for 3 years has resigned to his fate and alone brings up his daughter. After the wedding, they decided to walk along the waterfront. They had a long conversation about life and their destinies. "To be honest, I put my personal life in second place. It is very important for me that my daughter grows up in a favorable environment. I was worried that my new girlfriend may not find a common language with my daughter," said Arthur. "And I think raising a girl is a big responsibility, but at the same time a very interesting task. I'd be curious to be part of the process, Selena said, and was momentarily embarrassed by her words. Of course, she was referring to an abstract situation or the birth of her daughter, and was not trying to be Arthur's friend or fiancé. Selena, how do you feel about free relationships? We're adults, aren't we? Arthur suddenly asked. And how do you feel about it? Selena posed a counter question. I think that a relationship without commitment cannot last indefinitely. Sooner or later, one of the partners will get bored, and the other will have to start looking again. I prefer honest and open relationships, Arthur said. Selena felt a slight irritation at that moment. What's the matter with asking such serious questions on the first night of their acquaintance? And not to give a concrete answer yourself, that's not nice either. She suddenly felt a keen desire to be home sooner. Now she began to think about how she could quickly leave this company before Arthur asked for her phone number. But when it came to the phone, he turned into a slave man and still got her phone number. But Selena decided to teach him one last lesson. Arthur, it's good that you mentioned honesty. So if you suddenly think of meeting me again, I'll tell you right away that I'm absolutely not set up for a serious relationship. It's not in my plans right now. Even if something works out, it will be a light variety of workdays for me. It's about the honesty you were just talking about, she said. Arthur was dumbfounded by her last remark. Another 6 months passed. Recently, Jenny had given her parents the happy news that they would soon become grandparents. Now the whole family intends to get together for a family celebration in the next few days, just waiting for Tony to return from his business trip. At this time, things were going differently for Selena. Honey, this is getting out of hand. It's not normal to spend time unknown where until so late and not even find a chance to answer my calls. It's outrageous. Don't do that again. Arthur was indignant into the phone. I warned you a month ago that I would be very busy these days, Selena replied calmly. I wonder what you are so busy with if you are on vacation. Arthur asked. What are people on vacation for? To rest, right? So I'm on vacation. Isn't that a good reason? Selena flirted. All right, this time it's goodbye. I'm still sitting in our restaurant waiting for you. You tell me, how long will it be? Or I can come and pick you up myself? Arthur said. You don't need to come, and you don't need to wait either. I spent the whole evening in the pool, and now I'm terribly sleepy. And you and I will talk tomorrow. No, the day after tomorrow. You just wait for my call. I'll call you, Selena said and hung up. Not even 5 minutes later, Arthur called her back. Actually, this evening was very important for me. I didn't choose our restaurant for this date for nothing. Have you forgotten that today is 6 months since we met? Arthur asked, barely hiding his offense. I remember, Arthur. By the way, I congratulate you on this date. If you remember, you're obliged to come right now. I was actually going to talk about something very important for us today, said Arthur, rubbing the velvet box in which the ring lay. What's so important again? Are you thinking of marrying me? Selena asked in a serious voice. What's the big deal? You and I are adults. We know each other well enough. I have serious feelings for you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Arthur almost shouted those words into the phone. Well, if that's true, then let's do it the old-fashioned way. You go to my parents, John and Emma, and ask them to marry you. If they like you, that's fine with me, Selena said. By doing so, Selena expected that she had made it difficult for Arthur, and now it was unlikely that he would want to repeat his romantic impulse. But tonight she had absolutely no desire to think about it. 2 days later in the early morning, Selena was awakened by a call on her phone. Selena, it's your Uncle John, came a cheerful voice. Good morning, Uncle John. How are you? Everything's fine. Selena, we have some questions for you. To be exact, a nice guy from a nice family is asking to marry you. We'd really like him. What do you think? You have to live with him. Let your word be the deciding factor, said Uncle John. Selena wasn't going to give a straight yes or no answer. As a result of her vast life experience, she had accumulated many different variations of joking answers to such cases. As a result, the next family gathering grew into another event, the wedding of Selena and Arthur. After the wedding, they lived happily and never had a reason for scandals. True, Arthur periodically resented that Selena is difficult to keep something at home. And after the birth of the child, he flew on wings of happiness from the fact that his wife finally attached to the house, and he is happy to take care of her.